It seems like it's every little girl's dream to grow up, become a princess, and live happily ever after. Kristine Johnson grew up with so much ambition. Everyone knew she would do something big. One day her name would be in lights. They just didn't know that the reason she would be remembered is because of a monster with a very sinister plan. This is her story. Deep dives. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and if you've never been here before, I am Kimbyrleigha. Nice to finally meet you. The orange couch, it is still in my set. Funny enough, a lot of you said you liked it in here and wanted it to stay. I do have some other plans for it, but we'll see. Maybe I'll put a poll out there and see if you want it or you want the red chair back. Today's case happened right here in Los Angeles, and when I heard about it, I could imagine all of the locations that were being mentioned because I had been to many of them before. And actually, I had just stepped foot in one of the places about a week before I started looking into this case. It's another really twisted case that could really happen to anyone. And because I am here in LA, Jon and I decided to go and capture videos of our own and photos of the locations that I'm going to be talking about. You know how much I love to understand where all the different places were, how everything occurred. But before we dive into it, thank you for giving me a moment of your time to thank our most loyal sponsor, PDS Debt. So many of you have already completed the free 30-second online debt assessment at pdsdebt.com/Kim. And if you haven't, I'd encourage you to do it so that you can see where your credit is and take control of your debt. This is how I got rid of my debt, and I finally have better credit, and that's exciting for me, especially because summer's here. I know a lot of us want to take vacations, but the holidays are also right around the corner. And I consider Halloween a pretty big holiday. So that means I anticipate spending money, even though I know I already have a ton of Halloween decorations. I know it's gonna happen. And I also know that debt and finances, they're a touchy subject, and we usually want to ignore them. But if you're ignoring your debt, you're most likely missing out on thousands of dollars that you could be saving in interest and monthly payments. And there's a better solution with PDS Debt. The programs from PDS Debt make a real difference in your day-to-day life by saving you money the same day that you get started. It's easy. PDS Debt has customized zero-interest options for anyone that's struggling with credit cards, personal loans, medical bills, and collections accounts. They roll all of your payments into one low, zero-interest monthly payment, and everyone with over $10,000 or more in debt qualifies, and there's no minimum credit score required. Bad and fair credit are accepted. So if you're making payments every month on your debt and your balances are not going down, this program is for you. So you can save thousands in interest and fees and pay off your debt in a fraction of the time with PDS Debt. And they're offering a free debt analysis to my viewers for completing this quick and easy assessment at pdsdebt.com/Kim. That's pdsdebt.com/Kim. So take back your financial freedom today. And thank you so much to PDS Debt for sponsoring another one of my videos. Okay. Now I'd like to introduce you to Kristine Louise Johnson. She was born February 22nd, 1981 in Santa Clara, California, to her mother and father, Teresa, who goes by Terry, and Kirk Johnson. Before she was even out of diapers, the family moved from California to the small town of Saugatuck, Michigan. It's like night and day going from a busy city to a quiet resort town with a population of only about 1,000 people. It's a picturesque town. It's ideal to grow up in. It's nestled comfortably along the shimmering shores of Lake Michigan. It embodies the quintessential small town lifestyle, serene, secure, and close-knit. It's the type of place where roots run deep. Houses and cars are perpetually unlocked, and evening bike rides are untroubled by safety concerns. At the heart of this community is an unspoken understanding that everyone knows everyone, and people grow close to their neighbors. It's also a very popular vacation spot during the summer when people flock to its sandy beaches for that small town charm. It was where the Johnson family called home. It's where Terry rocked little Kristine, who they called Kristi, to sleep every night, sometimes singing to her. And one of her favorite songs to sing to her was "You Are So Beautiful to Me." Later in life, it was still special to Terry, but also something Kristi held as a fond childhood memory of bonding with her mother and the love that her mother had for her. Kristi grew up in a loving home surrounded by her parents and her older brother, Derek. He was about 4 years older than Kristi. The Johnsons were Episcopalian, and they made church a part of their weekly routine, instilling their faith and morals in their kids. But as devoted as they were to their children, Terry and Kirk realized the two of them were probably not going to stand the test of time as a couple. It was tough. The family would never be the same if they got divorced, but it was the best decision for the Johnsons. This was very hard on Kristi. Now she would have to split her time between her mother and her father's house. But like many other children that have to go through it, it's a very hard adjustment at first, and then it becomes your new normal. I know, I can relate to it. It's very traumatic for many children, even adults whose parents are going through a separation. That's exactly why so many parents stay together, because they want their kids to grow up in a home with both parents. But sometimes that just doesn't work out. Luckily, Kristi was very active, so her mind was not always fixated on the turbulence in her household. By 12 years old, she had already landed some small jobs here and there to make some extra spending money. Her father would joke and say that the only issue she had was keeping the jobs. She had an adventurous spirit, and that sometimes meant committing to one thing was a bit difficult, but Kristi was still so young. But that's the thing. A lot of changes were happening while she was young. Like her older brother, Derek, leaving for the Air Force. It was bittersweet. He was moving on in his life, growing as a person and professionally, but Kristi cried and cried having to say goodbye. But high school took up most of her time. So, of course, she had things to look forward to in between the back and forth with her parents and now her brother being out of the house. Kristi was also becoming her own person, and she stood out as she came into her own. As a matter of fact, she was almost impossible to ignore. She stood out even amidst the town's natural beauty with her big blue eyes and her blonde hair and full lips. She was stunning, but it wasn't just her physical attributes that made her shine. It was her infectious laugh. It was loud and wild, and it truly set her apart. When she laughed, so did everyone else. And as they say, it was a contagious laugh. She made you feel good about being in her presence. Kristi was undoubtedly beautiful on the outside, but that was far from her most alluring quality. She was warm and open, and she had an innate ability to make people feel good about themselves. She loved nothing more than to share her happiness with others. It's something that made her dad really proud of her. He mentioned how people appreciated her openness and willingness to befriend those she met. In a small town, you have small schools, and Kristi's high school was no exception. Her larger-than-life personality filled the hallways, and her iconic laughter echoed through the classrooms and the corridors. She left her mark wherever she went. While in high school, Kristi got involved in sports, but it wasn't the ones in school that she really loved. It was the ones she did during the summer when she went to visit her grandmother back in Santa Maria, California. One was sailing. She really enjoyed it. But what she loved the most was surfing at Pismo Beach. When she was there, she felt like she was in her element. It felt like home to her. But of course, reality would strike when she had to go back to Michigan. She did her very best to find fun activities to get involved in and ended up as an active theater club member. It makes sense with her outgoing personality and her laugh and that smile. She was a natural. Terry said she could tell there was just something special about Kristi. It wasn't just that she started turning heads. I mean, of course, Terry thought she was so beautiful, but she remembers thinking that Kristi just had that something, even back in high school. Well, it's true, Kristi would discover that something about herself, but for now, it was more important for her to make it out of high school. When summer painted Saugatuck with its warm hues, the town buzzed with tourists flocking to the picturesque beaches. And these were the times Kristi and her friends cherished the most. They loved the vibrancy of their beloved hometown. But as Michigan's summer came to a close and the area emptied out, the town's charm gave way to an isolating quiet. The winters were harsh. They're long, sometimes lasting up to 3 or 4 months with temperatures regularly going below zero. This frigid season, it was so different from the warm and vibrant Kristi. It was a constant struggle for her. She did her best to buy her time until the weather warmed up again, like waitressing at a local cafe. The restaurant owner was delighted to have Kristi on his staff because she was always cheerful and enthusiastic. Customers who interacted with her were always sure to have an enjoyable experience, and he said that her personality was magnetic. She had such a presence that they wanted her on their staff. She was always bright, happy, and smiling. And when she manned the register, people enjoyed being in the shop because of her. Growing up in a town like Saugatuck, where even going to a movie theater is a luxury, it can ignite a yearning for something bigger. And it wasn't long before Kristi's growing ambition became apparent to those around her, her relentless manifesting her dreams of escaping her quiet town. And when I was reading about all this, I couldn't help but think of another Kristi, Kristine Lazaro, from another video that I've done. They both had to endure these long winters, and they were looking for an escape, and they had very similar personalities, loud, infectious laughs, and big smiles. Kristi graduated in 1999 from Saugatuck High School, one of only about 60 other seniors in her class. At last, she felt free to start carving out an escape plan. Her high school graduation quote by Rolf Valstar perfectly encapsulated her enthusiasm for the future. It said, quote, "Reach high for stars lie hidden in your soul. Dream deep, for every dream precedes the goal," end quote. Her current goal was to go to college. She chose Western Michigan University out in Kalamazoo, which is about an hour inland from her home on Lake Michigan. It was going to be a change of scenery for one, and a change of pace for another. Meeting new people, going on an adventure outside of her small town. Anything can be exciting when it's new. She was also working part-time doing administrative work at a drilling company located in Holland, Michigan, where her dad was living. This change suited her. For a while, anyway. She made new friends, and she found a new hobby, dancing at raves. Most of us know what a rave is, but actually I learned a few new things. There are plenty of parties to attend at college, house parties thrown by other students, sometimes Greek life parties at frat houses or sororities, but then there are warehouse parties, and one step up were the more exclusive ones, curated by entertainment companies that went above and beyond, and those were the raves that the cool kids wanted to attend. Raves began with the emergence of house music in the 80s. Lots of young people wanted a place to enjoy dancing, a fun atmosphere, and their favorite music, among other things that I'm sure you know are associated with the culture, like MDMA or ecstasy. There was a pretty well-known company in Detroit, Michigan called Plur Kids, and they began throwing these massive parties. Everyone wanted in, and their flyers for the parties, they were pretty famous. There are whole YouTube videos of people who have saved some of these flyers from the 90s. It was a really interesting culture, and I found a Facebook page, of course I did, called Detroit Raves 96 to 01, because I really wanted to get a feel for the way these raves went down and what Kristi loved about them. The Facebook group consisted of people just posting memories and pictures of nostalgic places where the raves took place. And there were a ton of responses about how many memories it brought back. Here's a flyer from back in 1999 when Kristi was going to Detroit raves, and this one I found to be pretty awesome. I just bought a refurbished Mac clamshell laptop for my podcast set, but look at this design. It's cool, it's different. You'd feel special getting this flyer. It's like a golden ticket. This one was from November 20th, 1999. It says the 4-hour turntable tag team was Terry Mullen and Charles Feelgood, and they're meant to be kind of obscure. There's a guy showcasing one of the flyers from June 3rd, 2000 on a YouTube channel, and you can tell if the flyers are produced this well, the parties are probably outrageous and crazy and awesome. I'm saying all of this to say it made quite an impression on young Kristine Johnson. But it still was not enough to make her want to stay in Michigan. Any chance she got, she escaped to the sunshine. During spring break, she and her friends went to Florida, and they ended up getting tattoos to memorialize that trip. Kristi chose a hibiscus flower across her lower back. The next chance she got, she visited her paternal grandmother in California during the summer of 2000, after just 2 semesters at Western Michigan University. When she came back and experienced another bitter winter in Michigan, she knew this is not where she wanted to be. She would tell her mother that she just wanted to go back to California where she felt like there were more opportunities and better weather, and that's exactly what made me want to move here myself. At 19, Kristi was an adult, but of course a young adult, and moving across the country like that would probably not have been possible if it wasn't for the fact her grandmother lived there. So the decision was made. Kristi would live with her grandma, Katie Johnson, and attend college in Santa Maria, California. This was an exciting time for her. Now she would get to experience all the things she loved year-round. But Kristi was a responsible teenager. She didn't just think she was going to lay around all day soaking up the sun. She got a job right away, this time as a systems administrator for an electrical company. She also enrolled in classes at the local community college with the intention to transfer to California Polytechnic University and study to become an engineer. Maybe she was inspired by working at the electrical supply company or maybe the drilling business, and I'm not sure. But wow, The house she was living in, it was gorgeous. Just the weather, the bright blue sky, even just on Google Maps, you can tell how different it is than the dreary weather in Michigan. Here's where Santa Maria is located compared to where Los Angeles is, for example, just to give you perspective on where in California she was living at this time. A few months after taking classes at the community college, Kristi went to tour the Cal Poly campus, which is in San Luis Obispo, about 40 minutes away from her grandmother's house. It's to the north, further from Los Angeles and closer to where her mother, Terry, had just moved. That's right. Her mom decided to move out to Northern California not too long after Kristi made the move to Santa Maria. Even though they were still going to be about 3.5 hours apart, they were still much closer than they would have been if Terry was back in Michigan. It made her feel good about Kristi making such a big move. They talked on the phone every day, usually more than once, and they were very close. Kristi shared everything with her mom, especially her experience while visiting this new school campus. She knew she was going to enroll, and she began looking for jobs in the area. Now, I'm not sure where she was looking, but back then, I remember those days. We used Craigslist. It was really popular, so I wouldn't be surprised if that's where students were going to look for work. And eventually, Kristi finds a part-time job listing for a position on the set of an upcoming movie. Considering she has a background in theater, and of course anything to do with movies would sound really exciting, Kristi applied. She didn't think she was going to get it, but to her surprise and delight, she got hired to work as an assistant on the set of a thriller called Murder by Numbers. If you don't remember or know about this movie, it premiered April 19th, 2002. It's inspired by the true crime story of Leopold and Loeb, which I think I did a video about back when I first started true crime. Two very gifted high school students try to execute the perfect murder. In the movie, they're two rich kids growing up in California who get together to try to mastermind this murder and pin it on other people. So while this was in production, the cast and crew were filming all over San Luis Obispo, and Kristi was joining them. For someone like her from a very small town, this was huge. These were superstars, and this experience sparked something inside of Kristi. She was now making friends and getting to know people who lived and breathed everything Hollywood related. She realized this could be a new direction for her professionally. She really liked being on set, and actually she wanted to be part of what went on behind the scenes. So she decided to enroll in makeup classes at the Makeup Designery School in Burbank. She would be learning professional makeup artistry from licensed instructors with expertise in film, television, and fashion. Kristi also realized in order to pursue this new goal, she would probably need to move closer to where everything was going on. But she faced that daunting journey ahead. Los Angeles seemed like a world away, even from Santa Maria. That was just a taste of California, but the call of her dreams was stronger than the fear of the unknown, and she was ready to step into this exciting new chapter of her life. Kristi decided to move to West Hollywood on Palm Avenue, where she would be closer to jobs in movie production. A lot of studios are in Hollywood and in Burbank. That's where Disney, DreamWorks, Warner Brothers studios are, just to name a few. She figured being close by would open up many doors for her. I was actually drawn to this story for this part specifically because I too got involved in production on reality TV back in Florida when I was studying entertainment law. I moved to Hollywood to continue working behind the scenes, and I can tell you it is a fast-paced and exciting lifestyle. There's something new happening every single day. And as a makeup artist like Kristi was training to become, you get to literally be face-to-face with the biggest stars in the industry. Plus, it's much easier to get on the set as a professional than landing a role as an actor. So it's a good way to kind of get your foot in the door, and you can also make a pretty decent amount of money. But there's still a lot of competition. She knew it was a gamble, but with a dash of luck, she believed that she could make it. Little did she know how swiftly and dramatically fortunes can change. So just like that, Kristi left the comfort and security of her grandmother's in Santa Maria, and she moved to Los Angeles, a sprawling city teeming with 3.7 million residents. LA, the city of angels where stars are born and dreams become reality. It was a stark contrast to the life Kristi was used to. Now, during my research, I read a lot of blog posts, articles, and even watched some shows about this case. And most of them made it seem like Kristi came out to LA with the intention to go straight into Hollywood and become this big star. And that was why she made the move in the first place, but that's not accurate. Kristi had family in California. She was born there. Her mother, Terry, moved back to Northern California to be close to her. It's where she felt at home. It wasn't Kristi's plan. Santa Maria was not close to Hollywood or LA, but once she started taking those makeup classes in Burbank and working on sets of various productions and high fashion shoots, her passion grew. But this is hard work. It's hours of standing on your feet. It's driving all around Los Angeles in some of the most congested areas, finding parking, not getting benefits like medical insurance. And as fun as it was to begin with, it started to wear on Kristi. I mean, right now in Hollywood, writers and actors are stopping production to protest their contracts because they're not being paid their worth. So just imagine someone like Kristi in an even lower position. They don't call them starving artists for nothing. In her new city, Kristi began the search for more job opportunities, but she quickly realized that LA wasn't as welcoming as her hometown. She may have been a standout in Saugatuck, but in Hollywood, young dreamers like her were everywhere. It was tough for her to find work. It was very competitive, and Kristi was just waiting for that big break. But everyone knows that they don't come easily in the film industry. But at least she felt like she found her footing professionally and just needed to keep pushing. Kristi's next goal was to have a social life, taking one more step towards making LA her new home. The flashy, upscale club scene of LA initially was very overwhelming for Kristi, but it wasn't long before she found friends that made the new environment less intimidating. Among them was Aaron Garcia. The first time he met her, he remembered her walking in, lighting up the room, and he immediately knew she's not from LA. Together, they explored something familiar to Kristi, the rave scene. But the LA scene was new to her, and she was swept up in the excitement. Her city-wise friends found Kristi's small-town charm a refreshing change because despite her strikingly good looks, which usually is associated with vanity or being superficial, people were pleasantly surprised by her big heart. However, Kristi was a bit naive, and sometimes that made her vulnerable. The rave scene can be filled with drugs and dubious individuals. It wasn't without its challenges for the trusting young woman from a small Michigan town. Because she was so beautiful, she was constantly being hit on by men, so she had to learn to navigate this new world with all its potential dangers. As adventurous as she was, she also liked to stick to what she knew. And she knew a guy that she was already interested in. His name was Todd. They had met a couple years before and they began dating up until he moved away, but they kept in touch. And it wasn't long before they decided to move in together in West LA, splitting the rent because it was much better than paying for it in full. Although financial stability for now 20-year-old Kristi was still a struggle, but she wasn't giving up. In July of 2002, she wrote her dad, very excited, addressing him saying, "Hey, Daddy-O," before telling him how excited she was that she was working on an upcoming music video. She said, quote, "I was so nervous when I got down here, but I knew this is what I wanted, so I stuck with it, and now I'm on my way," end quote. She really felt like she was making it slow but steady. However, she still found herself grappling with professional uncertainty. Her career seemed stuck in neutral. After her initial foray into the movie industry as a production assistant, finding the next step in her Hollywood journey proved to be challenging. But still clinging to her dreams, Kristi began looking for a day job to make ends meet. That wasn't the only challenge she was facing. As many young couples come to find out, there's a honeymoon phase to relationships, and it had passed for her and Todd. Their relationship was unraveling. Finances were tight, loyalty was being tested, and their arguments were escalating, leading to some terrifying moments for Kristi. She confided in her mother about what was happening. She felt trapped because she couldn't afford to be out there on her own, but she also recognized the danger of staying in a toxic relationship that had started to become physical. Terry wanted to help. Terry started to look for places where Kristi could move, somewhere that she could share with other women roommates. While her mom was on the search for an apartment, Kristi was looking for a job. This was all a wake-up call for her. Even though it was exciting, Kristi started to think that maybe it was a good idea to go back to school and get a degree. That way she would have something to fall back on in case this Hollywood thing didn't work out. Just a few months after that message to her dad, where she seemed to have it all figured out, she was now in the process of trying to find her footing again. Her dad would graciously wire her money anytime she was in a bind. So fortunately, Kristi wasn't completely on her own. Her parents, despite their reservations, provided financial support. Her mom helped her by gifting her a car, a white convertible 1996 Mazda Miata, paying her cell phone bill, and supplementing her rent. This would help ease her transition into this new phase of her life. Like many people in the arts, she found herself working outside of her field of interest. By November 2002, Kristi finally landed a job doing data entry at a cellular company called CNCG in Marina del Rey, which is a little out of the way from West Hollywood. Like, it would be a drive. So she and her mom started looking for apartments in that area, but they had no luck. Finally, Terry was able to find her something in her price range. She would be splitting the rent with 2 other women. It wasn't in Marina del Rey, but close enough in Santa Monica, which is a beach town in LA. It's very, very pretty. It was a 3-bedroom apartment with a gated parking garage that Kristi would be sharing. This is 29th Street, a very residential area. It isn't walking distance to the beach, but close enough to get down there and experience beach life, which we know that Kristi loved. It's also a central location. It's close enough to LAX for traveling, and also if you want to go out to Hollywood for production-related jobs. But at this point, Kristi had decided to enroll at Santa Monica College. She worked weekdays all day from 9 to 6, and then she took classes at night, hoping to transfer to UCLA after about a year. Her move-in date to this apartment was December 19th, 2002. Just a couple months later, February 2003, 21-year-old Kristi's 2 years in LA had not unfolded as she had hoped. Her day job was unfulfilling, her career was stalled, her relationship had ended badly, her dreams were far from being realized. But despite these setbacks, Kristi remained determined. Her dad even tried to convince her to return to Michigan, but she was hesitant to abandon her Hollywood dreams. She clung to the belief that her big break was coming. Kristi knew exactly what she wanted to do. She just had to figure out how to make it happen. Her birthday was coming up that month on the 22nd, and Valentine's Day had just passed. Now there was a long weekend for President's Day, and that meant fun. The streets of LA are crowded with more people whenever there's a holiday and they don't have to go to work on Monday. Although Kristi was scheduled to work Monday the 17th, President's Day, since her workplace was still open. But she wanted to enjoy her weekend at least, so she planned on going to a rave on Saturday night, February 15th. In that case, she needed to buy a few things from the mall. Her mother called her that morning as usual, and as they spoke, she told Kristi that she would give her some early spending money for her birthday, so just buy whatever she wanted at the mall, and Terry would deposit money into her account to cover it later. By that afternoon, Kristi was on her way. The closest mall to where she was the famous Century City Mall in Santa Monica. I was just there last month, and it's gorgeous. It's very upscale, and the history is interesting. It was actually built on the back lot of Fox Studios in 1964. The studio sold the land to offset their budget on the Cleopatra movie. About a block away, you're walking on the Avenue of the Stars, one of the first streets in the town of Century City that was formed on this back lot of Fox. I don't like going to this part of town at all because I don't like driving there. It's way too much for me. But for a 21-year-old, this would be ideal for some LA shopping. Kristi headed out, and as usual, she talked to her mom about all of her plans for that holiday weekend. But there wouldn't be anything usual about this weekend at all. As the phone conversation ended, Terry and Kristi said I love you to one another before hanging up, as they did with every phone call. Later, Terry wanted to know how the shopping trip went, so she tried calling her daughter, but she never answered. Terry knew how busy Kristi was going to be hanging out with friends and having a good time, so she figured she would catch up with her the next day. But that's the thing. The next day on Sunday, when Terry would usually get a call from her daughter, she never received one. So she tried calling Kristi and again received no answer. Terry paid for Kristi's phone so that she would always be able to contact her. So this was a bit worrisome, especially since the phone was going straight to voicemail. Isn't that always the sign? Terry knew that she paid the bill, so she thought, okay, maybe after a long night of partying, Kristi's phone died and she just hadn't charged it before going to bed. We come up with the most logical reasons first. But by Sunday evening, Terry was getting more concerned. She still hadn't heard from her daughter, but again figured Kristi was just busy. If need be, she would reach out Monday morning because she knew Kristi would be at work. And that's exactly what she did. Again, Monday morning, Kristi's cell was still going to voicemail. Maybe she lost it. Maybe it broke. Only a few minutes past 9 a.m., Terry decided to call Kristi's workplace. She typically picked up the phone at her desk, but this time it rang and rang until Terry got Kristi's recorded message. Frustrated, Terry decided to call the main phone number and she reached Kristi's manager. She asked if Kristi was there and if there was a reason why she wouldn't be answering her phone. And this was the moment when things got even more concerning. The manager told Terry that Kristi had not shown up that morning. Terry asked if they knew where she would be, and the manager said, no, we don't. She's always been so reliable over the last 3 months of employment. She never missed one shift. And if she was running even a little behind, which only happened maybe once or twice, she would let them know. They said the last time they saw her was in the office on February 14th, Friday. The manager explained that her coworkers were surprised when Kristi didn't show up. One of them was a good friend of hers. He knew she had plans to attend a rave on Saturday night. She had told him about it on Friday, but she never mentioned where it was going to be. Terry didn't know what to do. She quickly got in touch with her ex-husband, Kristi's father, Kirk, in Holland, Michigan, and told him what was going on. They agreed if Kristi didn't turn up that day, they would have to go to the police. Meanwhile, Terry had an idea. She logged online to Kristi's cell phone account as well as her bank account, which they shared, but neither one of them had any information that would help her locate her daughter. She also called her older son, Derek, and informed him about what was going on. No one in her family had heard from her since Saturday. She'd had enough. She called the Santa Monica Police Department to report her 21-year-old daughter missing. First, they wanted to check to see if anyone by the name Kristine Johnson or someone matching her description had been in any reported vehicle accidents since Saturday, and there were no matching reports. The officer proceeded to advise Terry to try contacting hospitals in the surrounding area just to be sure that Kristi hadn't had a medical emergency and had been admitted. Terry tried every hospital with no luck. So she called back Officer Mark Holland from Santa Monica PD and told him she wanted to make an official report that Kristine Johnson was not accounted for and therefore missing. Think about saying those words. It's terrifying. Of course, they were still trying to get in touch with her roommates and anyone else who may know where Kristi is, but they needed help. Terry was over 3 hours away and Kirk was back in Michigan, but he promised to fly straight to California if Kristi didn't show up by Tuesday. Terry gave Officer Holland all Kristi's info, that she was 5'9", around 140 pounds, blonde hair, blue eyes, slender build, and that she had a geometric hibiscus flower tattoo across her lower back, drove a 1996 white Mazda Miata with a black convertible top with a California license plate. She also let him know that she recently had a tumultuous relationship with a guy named Todd Kalabas, and that they both lived in a West Hollywood apartment together before she moved in with her 2 roommates. Terry also explained that her and Kristi shared a bank account. She paid for Kristi's phone, so she had access to all of the records. That was pertinent information. Officer Holland got to work pretty quickly. He wanted to rule out the possibility that perhaps Kristi and her roommates had gone somewhere for the weekend or that they may know where she is. So he was able to get in contact with one of the girls that she lived with, Carrie Barish. For the record, I don't know if this is her real name. A lot of people's names are protected for privacy reasons, but obviously we need to call her something. So we're going to call her Carrie so it's not confusing. So Officer Holland, he asked her when the last time she had seen Kristi was and whether she knew where she was now. Carrie was surprised that a cop was calling her, but she told him that Kristi was just going about her normal routine. She had only known her about 3 months, so she didn't have intimate details about Kristi's personal life, but she was just auditioning, shopping, partying, hanging out, working, the usual, nothing out of the ordinary. She said she saw her on Saturday afternoon. Kristi had just returned from the mall and she was rushing around getting ready for an audition, and then she had to hurry to a party that she had paid for and RSVP'd to. So of course, Officer Holland is like, can we talk in specifics here? Do you know where these things were? Like, where's the audition? Where's the party? But Carrie said she had no idea in regard to the locations. This was not much information to go on, and Holland had to gather as much as he could because he was going to provide it to detectives when they took over the case for an investigation. But by 2 p.m., February 17th, he was armed with all the information that we know right now. He handed off the case to veteran detective Virginia Obenchain. She had been working at the Santa Monica Police Department for almost 2 decades. She'd seen it all, especially working in LA. As soon as Detective Obenchain is briefed on Kristi's case, she got a really sick feeling. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. She got chills. That's because certain aspects of this case reminded her a lot of another case from LA that happened back in 1996. It involved a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, aspiring actress and model who was a Los Angeles Raiders cheerleader, 27-year-old Linda Sobek. She had also talked to her mother the last day she was seen, and she was going to a last-minute photo shoot before an audition that she landed for the TV show Married with Children. It was on November 16th, 1996, but when her mom reached out later to find out how everything went, she wasn't able to get in touch with Linda. Linda's father, Bob, her mother, Elaine, and her brother, Steve, hadn't heard from her in a couple days. Does this sound familiar? So they made a police report, and eventually, the police linked a photographer named Charles Rathbun, and he admitted that he met Linda to discuss a portfolio, but that he didn't know where she was. Well, it turns out, this other man, this stranger, he finds photos of a woman out in the middle of the Angeles National Forest, and that was odd. So he hands him over to police because he saw the news about Linda being missing, and he thought the woman in the photos looked like her. Sure enough, that was Linda. So investigators go out to this forest area, and they find a day planner and a car rental agreement in the trash on the agreement was that name, Charles Rathbun. He breaks down and he admits that he was shooting Linda for a car magazine. He rented a Lexus SUV to get some really cool shots of her driving in the desert, but he has no idea where she was. Well, there was blood found on that car, so they knew he was lying, so he finally told him that he was driving the car and he was going towards her and he lost control and ran her over by accident. And then he was scared and he buried her in the Angeles National Forest. This man later showed investigators the shallow grave where Linda's body was, but her injuries were not consistent with the car crash and the car didn't have any damage, so things were not adding up. The autopsy showed that she had been engaged in a sexual act, which they suspected was forced, and she had most likely been asphyxiated. Charles tried changing his story many times, saying that, it was consensual. It was part of the deal. That many photographers know how these things work. Ew, that's just gross. But ultimately, it was found that he lied to Linda from the beginning. He lured her out into the desert to force her into relations with him and then kill her. How sad. And this was making national headlines back then. And it's a case that so many people in Hollywood remember. Many women afraid to work with photographers after hearing that because they thought they might be next. Obenshain didn't want to jump to conclusions because statistically speaking, the city is saturated with beautiful young women and men that are aspiring models and actors. One of them is bound to end up missing, maybe on their own volition, because perhaps the Hollywood dream just didn't work out and they left to go back home. So she needed to create a timeline and gather more information. The biggest piece of evidence they had to go on right now was the information about her car. They put out a bolo. Officers were to be on the lookout for a white convertible Mazda Miata. Next, Obenshain interviewed Terry. She asked her to try to recall anyone her daughter mentioned in the recent past. And she said, well, there's this guy, Lucas, that Kristi told her mom was very attractive and that he was living in her apartment building but moving out soon, and asked her to go on a trip to Hawaii with him. And there was also her recent ex, Todd. That's when Terry admitted that there were times that Kristi and Todd had physical altercations. He was possessive over her, locked her out of her apartment, and even out of her own car once. That didn't sound very good. The detective knew that that was going to be one of the next people she wanted to interview. But she did have some good news for Terry. There were no reports of any bodies at the coroner office that matched Kristi's description, and any others had already been identified. I guess that would be relieving, but it also meant that this detective was already thinking that Kristi could be dead. How heartbreaking for a parent to have to hear that, but they can't rule anything out. Their goal, of course, was to find Kristi before anything bad happened. The weekend had already passed. It had been 48 hours, and we know that those are the most crucial hours of a missing persons investigation. I can't imagine being a detective on the case because all of that on your shoulders. I mean, when I'm researching these cases, I work all day and all night. I can only imagine a detective and how invested they are. They probably don't get any sleep. I know they don't get any sleep. Day 2 of this investigation, Obenshain began looking into the limited cell phone data that she could pull up at the time, and it wasn't like it was today. But what she could ascertain was that the last outgoing call from Kristi's phone was at 5:34 p.m. and it was to 411. Back then, you called 411 when you needed an operator to assist you with something. It's usually related to a phone number or an address, and that call was 3 minutes in length. This seemed important to Obenshain. Had Kristi gotten lost somewhere? Maybe she was stranded and then her phone died. They were able to tell that it pinged off a tower on Ventura Boulevard, but they couldn't give an exact location. And that radius is pretty large. The next step was contacting the media, because as much as these days it seems like a double-edged sword, there's so many cases that are solved from media attention, but then you also get the fake leads, people wanting to inject themselves in the case for their 5 minutes of fame, especially here in LA. So as apprehensive as detectives like Obenshain were, they also knew the value in making the public aware of what was going on, because there could be a kidnapper out there, or worse. She started compiling photos of Kristi to make posters to give to the local news stations. And of course, once the local media got a hold of this information, you probably can guess what the headline said. Beautiful blonde aspiring model and actress missing, may have been headed to meet a photographer, even though that wasn't really the exact facts given. But of course, with so many people working in the entertainment industry, this is going to bring a lot more attention to the case. It's going to make a lot of people feel unsafe. They're going to feel scared. And it's going to affect them more because they can relate. The media knew that. Plus, with the Linda Sobek case still so fresh in everyone's minds, it was like they were having horrible flashbacks to those same headlines in 1996, Most, if not all, of the articles I read from February 20th said 21-year-old Santa Monica woman who may have been on her way to Beverly Hills to meet a photographer has not been seen for 5 days. And of course, they went on to give a description of her car, that her family and friends were concerned, and if anyone had any information to please call the Santa Monica Police Department. Obenchain had a search warrant for Kristi's apartment, and investigators were scouring every room looking for anything that could lead them to her whereabouts. They also collect items that may have DNA on them in case they need it later, like a toothbrush, a hairbrush, discarded food, that sort of thing. While conducting the search, investigators found something that seemed relevant. A receipt from a lingerie store. The date was February 15th, the day that Kristi went missing. This was collected, and now the investigators are reaching out to Bank of America to get a detailed report of all the retail locations Kristi bought items from that day. Now, this lingerie store is famous in LA. If you live here, you've gone there or you know about it. It's a bright pink building, and it's actually a private store. You need to purchase a $2 membership in order to shop. This is a rule that was put in place so that it would deter people from going in there for the wrong reasons. Their website says if you're in the Los Angeles area and you want to shop where the stars go, like Jennifer Lawrence, Jennifer Aniston, Gwyneth Paltrow, Emma Stone, Mila Kunis, just to name a few. There's a whole bunch. You can see them on the screen. Where they shop for all their intimates, then you'll need to purchase a membership to Trashy Lingerie, which is the name of the store. And although it's called a lingerie store, and they do focus on intimate apparel, they also have costumes, shoes, hats, wigs, swimwear, and there are so many theme parties and Playboy Mansion parties here in LA, so people shop there for much more than just lingerie. The detectives know Kristi was planning to go to a rave, so she most likely bought something for her outfit. It's another clue to look into on top of many others, like examining Kristi's work computer. Posters are being handed out at this point, especially where they knew she was going that day, the Century City Mall. By the end of the first week, the detectives had collected a lot of useful tips, and they had come from friends and family members, and now they had a few more things to look into. There was even more information given to them about her ex, Todd. Her roommate, Carrie, mentioned that Kristi had just visited him that past weekend, February 7th, before she went missing. Todd had moved out to Santa Maria, where Kristi's grandma lived, and she drove out there a lot anyway, so she went and stopped by to see him and hang out with her ex. The last time Carrie saw Kristi, she was actually wearing an outfit that she purchased on that trip. A pair of low hip huggers. They were baby blue corduroy, and they had slits in the bottom near the ankles, along with fringe on them. Her shirt was a sleeveless white top with light blue tiny stripes that matched perfectly with her pants. Now they know what she was probably wearing when she left her apartment, and that was vital in asking the public if they had seen her. Analysts have been checking her computer, and they got into her email account. And that's when they find their next big lead. An email that Kristi sent to an event coordinator on Thursday morning, February 13th. It was in relation to that rave on Saturday night. Apparently, Kristi found out about the party online. It was happening in downtown LA in a 2-story industrial warehouse. She sent an email to the coordinator talking about how she hadn't gone out in a while, and she was really looking forward to this event because of the lineup. It reminded her of back in the day when she used to go to Plur Kids shows in Detroit. But she was informed that afternoon in a response email that the tickets were already sold out. However, the coordinator said that he would put Kristi's name on a special list, but it didn't mean she had a ticket or this was a formal admission of any kind. It all depended on how many people were showing up. However, upon further investigation, the detectives determined that this was just kind of an advertisement. They try to hype up these events and make them sound really exclusive, only to give you a link later to buy tickets or to buy VIP tickets. That way they can upsell you. It wasn't clear if Kristi knew all of that at the time, but she did have plans to attend this event because she had told people like her coworker that she was going on Saturday. By now, investigators have a couple more names that they need to check out. Lucas, from the apartment building for one. They connect with him, and it turns out he admits he ran into Kristi. She was walking up from the parking garage that Saturday afternoon. He said she was her usual, excited, happy self and mentioned she was in a rush to get to an audition and then head out to a party. Same thing we already heard. He also provided an alibi and it checked out. Carrie had also mentioned that there was some random guy over visiting Kristi on the night of the 14th on Valentine's Day. But it wasn't her ex. They make the link when a tip comes in from this guy. He admits being over there that he's just a friend of hers. They watch a movie together, and he left sometime after midnight. They met through the rave scene about a year earlier. So now that they know that he has information about raves, they figured, okay, it's common knowledge that the rave scene is full of drugs and interesting characters. So had something happened? Had she maybe disappeared from the rave? They started asking him, what did Kristi do at these parties? Was she a big drinker? Did she do drugs? And he said, I don't know her to be the type of person to do drugs. She just liked to dance to the music. He never saw her heavily intoxicated or doing drugs. Okay, so they didn't get too much further here, but finally they tracked down Kristi's ex, Todd. And her circle of friends told them he didn't take the breakup very well at all. Police were beginning to have their suspicions about him, so he was brought in for questioning. Todd was determined to clear his name and prove his innocence. He was willing to do whatever it took. He told the detectives that he loved Kristine very much and he would never hurt her. He willingly took the 100-mile drive from Santa Maria to Santa Monica for an interview. They first asked him, how did you two meet? He said it was back in 2000. They were at an event in San Bernardino while Kristi was visiting her grandma one year, and they connected. They were just friends until Halloween of 2000. That's when they became an item. And they dated for about a year until Todd moved away to Texas, but they kept in touch here and there. About a year ago, February 2002, Kristi flew out to Texas to visit him. They had a really good time and wanted to continue seeing each other, even though it was long distance. But in April, on another trip to Texas, they discussed moving in together. They talked about everything. Kristi's living situation, being by herself in Hollywood and struggling. So Todd agreed to move out and in with her in California. They tried making it work, but he said that the issues were about Kristi not having a steady job and them disagreeing on boundaries with the opposite sex. With her going to auditions and all of that, it just wasn't working out. And actually, it did become physical, as it was rumored. Todd insisted it was actually Kristi that started to hit him. It was before Thanksgiving, November 2002. He only hit back in response. He said he slapped her a couple times and he did lock her out of her car. But that was because he didn't want her to drive away in anger and get hurt. They didn't know what to believe. But he did tell them that soon after that, he moved out. Now to the more important question. Did he know where Kristi was? He said no. They asked him where he was on February 15th, and he said he was all the way out in Santa Maria that day. To prove his alibi, Todd provided the police with evidence that he had been dirt biking and gave them several of his friends to check with. It turns out his alibi was corroborated by his friends. So there you have it. Todd is ruled out as a person of interest, at least for the time being. They're trying hard to pin down a timeline of the last time Kristi was seen, so they get in touch with the rave coordinator. And they want a copy of the guest list. They were actually shocked when they saw it. Kristi's name was not crossed off. This meant she never made it to the party. But of course, they needed to press even further, so they asked the coordinator if she was sure that Kristi hadn't shown up. She said yes. Her mom, her brother, and 4 of her friends are responsible for checking each person's identification. There were 135 people that entered, and when they did, each one of them were marked off the list to make sure they were accounted for, mostly so they don't ask for refunds. So what happened to Kristi? Well, Kristi's bank records are finally faxed over, and this helps a lot with the timeline. According to her debit card transactions, Kristi made a purchase at 11:45 that morning on February 15th at a Starbucks on Santa Monica Boulevard. Then at 11:58, a transaction was made at a 76 gas station also on Santa Monica Boulevard. So now they know she probably filled up her tank for her plans that she had later. So could they rule out that she ran out of gas somewhere and was in trouble on account of that? They don't know. But it seems more likely that wasn't the case. By 1:33 p.m., a transaction was made at Bloomingdale's department store in Century City Mall. Now they know that she was there, or at least her debit card was. Then just 3 minutes later, another transaction from a store across from Bloomingdale's at Guess. The final debit card record on her account shows that at 2:15 p.m., Kristi's card was used at Trashy Lingerie store on La Cienega Boulevard. I made a little map to show you all of these locations. I'm showing you where her apartment is on 29th Street, the Starbucks that was only a few minutes away from her apartment, the gas station on her way to Century City Mall, and then her destination here where she used her card at Trashy Lingerie. Then she went back home. Then the last call she made was at 5:34 p.m., somewhere within a 3-mile radius on Ventura Boulevard, which could put her anywhere. Investigators are now going to request the security footage from the Century City Mall, specifically any footage that might show Kristi in the stores that they found on her bank statement, just to see if there was something unusual going on. Was she acting differently? Was someone forcing her to do anything against her will? Or if anything was just out of the ordinary? Maybe she had a weird interaction with an employee in the mall or a stranger. It's Friday, February 20th. It's a little past noon. And as they're waiting for all this evidence to come in, they're combing through hundreds of tips. And one grabs their attention. A 24-year-old woman named Susan Murphy gives them a call. Susan says that she just saw an article in the LA Times about Kristi's disappearance. And as soon as she read it, her heart sank. She had this overwhelming gut feeling that she may have some information about what happened. They're listening. And she goes on to explain she works as an accountant in Santa Monica, okay, and here's where she makes the connection. On January 24th, about a month ago, after work, around 5:30, she changes out of her work clothes and into something a little bit more fun for a dinner that she was going to at 7. The restaurant was at that same mall, Century City. She remembers what she was wearing because of what happened next. She had on a gray miniskirt, a tight black crewneck sweater, dark pantyhose, and black knee-high boots. She walked to the mall from her workplace, and it was only about a 10-minute walk. She went through Macy's and decided to look around at some clothing and accessories for a little bit, and then she took the elevator to the second floor, just browsing. All of a sudden, she's looking at some clothes on a display table, and she feels a presence next to her. And there's a guy standing right beside her. He just came out of nowhere. She described him as being about 6 feet tall, blue eyes, smooth skin, well put together, clean shaven, kind of like curlier, wavy hair. He was attractive. He was in his 30s. He had a pair of khaki pants on, a beige colored coat, and a baseball cap. Casual, but put together. And then he spoke, and he just said, "I think you're very attractive." She was just trying to respond to the comment to be polite, so she told him that was very nice of him. And that seemed to end their interaction. He turned around and kind of started walking away, minding his own business. But then it's like he had a second thought, and he turned back around and walked back right to her, standing next to her again. He introduced himself as Victor Thomas. He said he was the director of photography for a company called Silver Screen Partners, and that it was in connection with Disney Company. He proceeded to explain that they were working on casting for a new James Bond movie. He also made sure to let her know that this had to stay between them, that the production has a strict expectation of confidentiality. But he was letting her know all this because even though it's not his job to look for talent, they had been casting for weeks. And he said he sat through so many auditions just to bump into Susan and think to himself, she would be perfect if she's interested. He went on to say that he preferred an actress that had a smaller chest and thicker thighs, more toned and athletic, but slim. And she had it. She had the look. Well, she had heard this before being in LA, but at the same time, you never know. And it piqued her interest. She had time to kill, so they walked together and just started chatting about it. They went to the food court, and this guy offered to buy Susan a coffee. She declined because she didn't drink coffee. So instead, he just bought her a Snapple, and they sat and chatted. He seemed nice, ordinary, respectful, knowledgeable about the film industry. And there are stories of women who are noticed at malls and become famous. So even though Susan's kind of skeptical at first, she entertains Victor's conversation and flattery. He explained that for this movie, Sean Connery and Pierce Brosnan would be coming together in the film, and the main position they were casting for would be a billboard. And the amount, well, it would pay $100,000. And that sounded too good to be true. But then again, it also sounded different from the run-of-the-mill offers and acting jobs in LA. They're usually paying nothing, and most people don't take them seriously anyway. But this sounded promising if it panned out. So Susan told the detectives she really hoped this would be true because being a Bond girl would be amazing. It's legendary. So she asked Victor what the process would be. He said, well, Sean and Pierce, they would be at the local studio the very next day, so maybe he could convince them to see her for an impromptu audition, upon his recommendation, of course. Now, I know this sounds a little far-fetched, but I have a friend from Florida. His sister was actually casted in Twilight in almost the same way. Someone recommended her. It does happen. Here's where things get interesting, though, if they're not already. He asked her if she'd be interested, and Susan says sure, so he goes on to tell her that what she needs to wear had to be very specific for this casting. She had to make the best impression. It needed to be something that would just exude the qualities of a Bond girl. He was very specific, so she took note. Are you ready for this? He told her to wear a black miniskirt, and the shorter and tighter the better. A white men's-style button-up collared long-sleeve shirt, sheer black pantyhose, and 1940s-style black stiletto heels. Her hair, which was dark brown, needed to be tightly secured back into a ponytail. He told her that he was going to provide a necktie to complete the outfit when she got to the studio. Meet him the next day on Saturday at 5:30 p.m. at an address he scribbled on a piece of paper. It was off La Cienega Boulevard, close to Santa Monica Boulevard. And that was it. She agreed to meet him, and she left for dinner with friends. He followed behind her for a little while, and then he said goodbye and how excited he was about the next day. Susan was too, but she was also apprehensive. When she got home that night, she told her fiancé Mark Wilson about the whole story. He just happened to be a former police officer from London, England, and he was more than skeptical of jokers like this who just walk up to women and start spitting this kind of BS. He knew how attractive Susan was and the way that men think. It sounded like this man just wanted to get closer to his woman, and he wasn't a fan of the entire thing. It sounded very scammy to him. But then again, they were like, well, what if it's true? It could be life-changing for them. So they decided to go together, sort of. Mark would drive Susan to go meet with this guy, but he would park at a distance so that it wouldn't be so suspicious. And then she would walk up, wait by herself, and he would keep an eye on everything that was going on. If anything weird happened, he would run over there to save the day. But at least this would give Susan a chance to find out if this was a real opportunity. However, Susan did not feel comfortable wearing that skimpy outfit that Victor had instructed her to put on. It was too much. The heels and everything walking down the street, it just wasn't going to happen. So she just put on the shirt since that was appropriate. And she just came in pants and sneakers and put the heels and the other items into a bag and brought them along. She walked to the location. She waited. About 10 minutes later, Victor showed up as promised. She also told Mark she wouldn't go anywhere with this guy. So Victor has a business suit on. He's got some papers and a pen in his hand. But the look that he had on his face gave Susan a bad vibe before he even said a word. He looked angry. He was upset. And he's like, that's not what I told you to wear. I'm taking you somewhere to change. He saw Susan's reaction and he kind of toned down his attitude and said, let's just go get a drink somewhere, talk about the roles. You'll get more comfortable and prepared. And as he said this, he actually touched Susan. He nudged her forward with his hand on her shoulder, and she was scared and uneasy. And she turned around and said, I'm not going anywhere with you. You need to provide me with some ID and proof that you work for this company. And good for her. Victor acted insulted. He was like, how dare you? That kind of thing. He was like, I left my wallet on set. But Susan wouldn't back down. She's like, oh, well. To which he shouted, you know what? You're giving up on an opportunity of a lifetime. Really? Upset at this point, Susan told him off. She said, no, actually, my safety is the most important thing. Victor didn't seem to want to give up on Susan. He actually wanted her to go with him. And he tried telling her, come on, let's just go meet my friend Natasha. We can discuss everything. Susan didn't know who Natasha was and knew this was probably a big scam. She didn't follow him. Instead, she backed away. And at that point, Victor had to get in the last word. He's like, you know what? Forget about it. You're not right for the part anyway. Well, as this is all going down, Mark is driving up. He jumps out of his car and he runs after Victor. His cop instinct just kicked in. He could tell this guy was up to no good. And Victor ran. So Mark and Susan, they jump in their car and they race after him. This man was trying to get through security gates at buildings. He couldn't, so he ran down an alley. Mark takes a back way and then tries to cut him off at the end of the alley. When they drove down there, they saw this man crouched under a bush. And when they got closer, he ran again. Finally, they were able to corner him. Mark jumped out, caught up to him, grabbed him, patted him down to make sure he wasn't armed. And it was true, he didn't have a wallet on him. So maybe this was just a misunderstanding. But Mark couldn't help himself. He started yelling. He was telling them, I'm either going to kill you or bring you to the police. And he was just probing him about his intentions and the name of the company he worked for. At this point, Victor's kind of crying. He's insisting he works for Disney. But before letting him go, he tells Victor, I need to get a number from you, and I'm going to call it, and I'm going to verify that you're who you say you are. So they went over to the car to get a cell phone. But as soon as he starts dialing in this number, Victor runs. It turns out it was a fake number, by the way. Of course it was. So the next day, Susan called the police. But as she was waiting on hold, she thought, you know what? I better not. because there's no actual crime to report. It was all speculation. There's no proof. But she was a part of SAG, the Screen Actors Guild. So she called them and she asked them, is there a James Bond movie currently casting? And they said, no, there's nothing in production. There's nothing casting. Now she had confirmation that this guy, Victor, truly was up to no good. But what were his intentions? Was he going to harm her, force himself on her, kill her? Or was he just using his pull as a supposed businessman in Hollywood as a pickup line with no cruel intentions except to maybe get to know her better? She didn't know, but she just knew it didn't feel right. This was all very interesting. It was a really scary scenario, and Obenchain is glad that nothing happened to Susan, but she doesn't really know how this relates to Kristi. The only connection was the location, Century City Mall. With as many people who frequent the location, it could be a coincidence and not a connection. However, because of how detailed Susan was about what she was instructed to wear, coupled with the reaction that Victor gave her when she didn't show up in it, they decided to see whether Kristi had purchased items that matched that description. So the detectives decide to call and get itemized receipts from every store that Kristi used her debit card that day, as well as footage from now January 24th. Maybe the cameras at the mall captured Susan talking to this man. Meanwhile, they run the name Victor Thomas and nothing comes up. But there's something they could do. Susan and Mark got a good look at this guy. By the next day, they asked a sketch artist to come and meet them to create a composite of this man. I always wondered how this process is carried out, and I looked it up. There are all kinds of different methods, usually using a computer with a face, and the artist will keep changing the features until it matches as closely as possible to what the witness saw. But back then, they did it with pictures of different people's faces with different features, and then the witness would pick ones to be drawn on the composite until it was completed. This took several hours. And afterwards, Susan went to the mall with the detectives and showed them all of the places that she remembered going to that day. Afterward, they went to the security office, pulled up the footage, went through it, and they finally catch a glimpse of Susan. She's like, that's me. She came through an entrance. And then a man was following closely behind her. They were able to freeze a frame that showed as much detail as possible for as grainy as these videos always are. And Susan was like, oh my God, that's him. He's wearing a baseball cap as she described. So they end that day with a lot of information. There was still a lot of footage to go through to locate Kristi on the mall cameras. But that next day, her dad, Kirk Johnson, was sitting down with investigators, hardly able to hold it together. He felt helpless. He knew his daughter was nice and naive. She saw the best in people, and she had been taken advantage of in the past. I hate hearing that. I really do. But I want to make a quick point about something. So I have been called a Karen before, and I've seen other people being judged because they say something when they see something that isn't right. I always report things that feel wrong or that look wrong to me, and it's not about trying to accuse anyone of doing something. It's just in case it connects somehow in the future with something else that goes wrong. So I want there to be a record. And we should all be doing this. If we see something, say something. Someone messaged me not too long ago, and they told me that because she watched my channel, she remembered me saying if she saw anything to report it. She was walking home. She saw some items scattered on the ground. They looked interesting, almost like someone's purse had been dumped out. And usually she would just walk by. It's not her business. But this time, she remembered what I said, and she called the police line and reported what she saw. And ultimately, they connected this to something that happened to someone. So you just never know. And I wanted to throw that out there because I think a lot of times we don't want to be an inconvenience, kind of like Susan felt when she called, but then hesitated and didn't make a report. You never know what's going to be significant. You never know what's going to be a connection. So I highly encourage you to report things that don't seem right. The search was intensifying. There were dogs sent out to track Kristi's scent. Volunteers were searching canyons. Officers were patrolling different locations from Santa Monica to Beverly Hills, hoping to locate Kristi's car. Several calls did come in from people that said they saw a Mazda Miata, but none of those tips panned out. It wasn't until Monday, February 24th, that they got something reliable to check into. After the bolo was sent out, the case got wider media attention. All around the city, parking garages were checking diligently to make sure Kristi's car wasn't inside. They do this on a routine check every day, but now the checks are being conducted with a specific car in mind and not just like a random abandoned car. So there is a hotel parking garage that provided parking for 2 hotels, Century Plaza and the St. Regis, both in Century City where the mall is located. As a matter of fact, it's right near the mall. It's right here. This is the distance. Now, of course, things have changed since 2003. This is not exactly what the hotels look like today because they've undergone renovations and there's new hotels and they change their names. But this is the vicinity of where the hotels were. And this is what the area looks like now. And I believe that this is probably the nearest parking garage right here. Could be a new one. But regardless, just imagine it was somewhere right in this area because this is the vicinity where the hotels were located. As a matter of fact, it's so close to the mall, it's walking distance. People could possibly park their cars in this garage if they wanted to. It's a 2-minute drive to the mall where Kristi had been the day she disappeared. But we know that she also made it home that day because her roommate saw her, and so did Lucas. But as a routine search was being conducted, they found the white Mazda Miata. It was the make, model, and color, so they contacted the police. The license plate matched, and it was confirmed to be Kristi's car. It was sitting in a valet parking spot, and this gave detectives hope that maybe Kristi had decided to get a hotel. Maybe she's using an alias. Maybe she's hiding out for a little bit. Or maybe she met someone who's whining and dining her. Or maybe it was something totally different. Crime scene technicians showed up. They were searching for anything that they could find to lead them to Kristi's whereabouts. They pulled fingerprints from all over the inside and the outside. They located a cell phone that was on the front seat. There was a water bottle inside there and like a movie tape. Other than that, there wasn't much for them to go on. But the fact that it looked like Kristi had left her cell phone behind was puzzling and concerning. But what you're about to hear was even more horrifying than that. They tracked down the valet manager. He had actually been working for these hotels for 30 years parking cars, and he remembered that car that night. For many reasons. One is because the usual cars that come through are expensive. They're Lamborghinis, Ferraris, Rolls-Royce, those type of cars. After all, this garage is designated for 2 very luxury hotels. A tiny, older model Mazda Miata, it was going to stand out to him. He told detectives that he was working the graveyard shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. from February 15th into the morning of the 16th, and that Mazda pulled in around 5:45 in the morning and proceeded to park in a valet-only spot. The attendant started to walk over to inform the driver that that spot was reserved and they couldn't self-park. That's when the driver got out, locked the door, and started to walk away. So the attendant yelled out to them saying, "Hey, you cannot park here, it's valet." Instead of moving the car, the driver turned around, threw the keys at the attendant, and yelled, "Valet it then." The driver was a man. It wasn't Kristi. And that was horrifying for detectives to realize. Someone else had driven Kristi's car and left it here early morning after she went missing. At first, finding Kristi's car gave them hope. Like I said, that maybe she's hiding out in a hotel room, but now it seems like something even more sinister. The valet attendant said that the man walked towards the Century City Mall, and when he first encountered him, he seemed to be in a daze. That is, until he yelled to him. Then he kind of snapped out of it. The man was well-dressed. He was white. He's in his 40s. He had like blondish, brownish hair with a little bit of gray in front, and he was maybe 6 feet tall and 200 pounds. The entire premises was searched. Both hotels were searched. Every room was looked into. There were canines trying to track Kristi's scent, but nothing turned up. And by this time, the press is all over the story. Kristi's picture was everywhere, and the public was paying attention. Again, making national headlines. People from all over America were captivated by her story, and they wanted her to be found. When Terry and Kirk were informed that her car had been, they thought that it was good news. But the way that the investigators were framing it, it didn't seem like a positive sign. After the car was found and Susan Murphy had come forward, police put out another press conference, this time with additional information about the car, where it was found, and the scenario involving a woman and a stranger posing to work with Disney on a James Bond film. They were careful not to reveal any of the identities of the witnesses, but they did put out the composite sketch, as well as this statement from Terry. She said, quote, "I was elated that they found the car and that this would be a clue to Kristi's whereabouts. But Kristi was not found, and I, of course, was disappointed. We're making progress, and I know that Santa Monica Police Department is working around the clock on this effort, and they have continued to reassure me that they have all the resources to find Kristi, and I have absolute faith in them. It is very disturbing and horrific to think that there's a man that has captured my daughter And for me to think about the type of situation that she may be in, it's absolutely overpowering. I can't think about it. We'll find her no matter what is happening to her. We will find her." End quote. And then she begged the person who had Kristi to please release her gently. And that broke my heart, especially with what most of you know about has just happened in Alabama with a woman named Carlee Russell. That investigation is still ongoing, but it appears as though she actually staged her own disappearance. She had her friends and her family worried. The community was worried. Resources were being put out there. And to think that these things really happen, that people make these things up when there's individuals going through real danger out there. So it hurts to think that there are parents like Kristi's out there that are truly suffering in these moments. The detectives finally receive an itemized breakdown of all the purchases that were made on Kristi's debit card. At 1:33 p.m., Bloomingdale's, 2 pairs of sheer hosiery brand pantyhose, which came to $25, and a $185 white button-down collared blouse, for a total of $226.24. Then the next charge at 1:36 p.m. was right across from Bloomingdale's at the Guest store, a black miniskirt for $73.61. Finally, at 2:15 p.m., she bought a pair of Ellie brand size 9, 6-inch black heels with straps on the ankles for $54.13. If you haven't put it together yet, it's the exact outfit that Susan Murphy was told to wear to the fake James Bond casting. The exact items. After they made this connection, it was almost as though they knew they had him. It had to be the same person. But they went back to interview Kristi's roommate, Carrie. They wanted to ask specific questions, things that may have been overlooked since the time she heard that her roommate was missing. They recalled how detailed Carrie was at explaining what Kristi had been wearing and what she purchased the weekend before, the blue corduroys, the matching shirt. They wanted to see if Kristi had shown her her most recent purchase and if she can remember anything, no matter how small it may be. I think the pressure is on. When your friend has now been missing for 2 weeks, Carrie was eager to help, and sure enough, she said yes. She said when Kristi was getting ready to leave that Saturday morning, she had initially told Carrie that she was just kind of hanging out that day, window shopping. But when she came back around 2:45 in the afternoon, she had an entirely different demeanor. She was super excited, rushing around, and thinking hard about exactly what happened when Kristi came in the door that day. She reported that she recalled Kristi saying that she was on her way to an audition. It was a new project that was just starting, and they wanted a new face, someone that wasn't stick thin, and that she was perfect. She thinks it might have been a James Bond film. She said something about it being a fast turnaround and that she was going to have to start filming in a week and she needed to get a passport because some of the scenes are overseas. Carrie probably didn't know to pay close attention to everything because she had no idea Kristi would never be heard from again. But she was racking her brain, and she told detectives that Kristi mentioned if she landed this role, she would be the lead actress and making upward of like $100,000. But she needed to hurry to get to this impromptu audition by 5:30, and she already had the outfit, which she described as sexy and sultry to show off a lot of leg. Detectives are pleased at the detail that Carrie is relaying to them, so they press her in regard to the actual outfit that Kristi was in possession of. Did she show her? And she says yes. It was a white long-sleeve shirt with a pointed collar that buttoned up, a black lycra-style miniskirt, patent leather black 6-inch heels, and sheer pantyhose. Carrie told the detectives that Kristi had actually tried all of it on when she got home. She could hardly walk in the heels because they were so high. Kristi mentioned that this is not something that she would usually wear, but she understood that they wanted her to look a certain way. The last thing that Carrie recalls Kristi saying was that the meeting was in a really nice part of Beverly Hills and that a group of women were going to be called out there. But she was told she was at the top of the list. And that's so sad. I can't help being choked up thinking about my own daughter and young Kristi and everything that they imagine is going to go right in this situation, that their dreams are going to come true. Or even envision my younger self and how excited all of this must have been for Kristi. I just can't believe it. It was all adding up to exactly what Susan Murphy had dreaded. The detectives asked Carrie what Kristi thought of this whole thing. And she said, she had some doubts, but she kept saying, what if it's real? But what if it wasn't? I'm so sad for her. They also got this video footage of Kristi at Bloomingdale's What they don't have is footage of her running into anyone. They scoured hours of footage, but they couldn't find anything that showed her talking to a stranger. Let me set the stage for the next big lead. It's February 26th. Marianne Larios is at home. She's watching the Wednesday news, and she sees a composite sketch. And even though most of us laugh at these sketches because they usually look so bad, Marianne was a parole officer. She was familiar with all of her parolees. She knew their charges, their stories about what they had done in the past. She had time to study their faces at each appointment. She knew she was looking at one of her parolees. His name? Victor Paleologus. He had just recently been paroled on January 20th, 2003, about a month before Kristi went missing. Marianne wasted no time. She called the police with this information, even though she wasn't 100% sure it was him. She said it looked very similar, and the charges against him and the things he had done in the past pointed in his direction. So wait until you hear this, because I was shocked, like jaw to the floor. I couldn't stop reading about what they find. First, they run this guy's name, and it turns out he's already in custody in a Los Angeles County jail for grand theft auto. His arrest date, February 17th, 2003. That was 2 days after Kristi was last seen. So he very well could be their guy. Victor Thomas was the name that the strange man gave Susan Murphy. Coincidence on the first name? I don't think so, but cops aren't so sure. That would mean that 2 weeks after he got out of jail, he's already planning this elaborate scheme and carrying it out? Well, they don't know who they're dealing with, and I wish I didn't either. As they dig deeper, the address on his record matched a restaurant on La Cienega Boulevard, the exact location where he told Susan to meet him. Plus, he was what they refer to in California as a 290, and that's the penal code for someone convicted of a sex crime. How much more information do they need? Well, as much as they can get. The first conviction on Victor's record was back in the fall of 1989. It happened in Manhattan Beach, not too far from where I am recording in this studio. It's a very popular beach town where people come to enjoy the sunshine, the nightlife, and one of those people was Kristine Johnson, an up-and-coming actress, only 21 years old at the time, and a man approached Kristine at this bar and complimented her on her dark hair and her hazel eyes, introducing himself as John Maroney. He said he was a music executive for Columbia Records. He went on to invite her to an exclusive VIP party in downtown LA. It was going to be at a luxury hotel, a presidential suite. Madonna would be there among a ton of other celebrities. It's not uncommon for these parties to take place, and it's pretty normal for people to invite you to come along. And it sounded like fun to Kristine. The man was around her age. He wasn't bad looking. He was a smooth talker, so she agreed to go. He told her he would pick her up the next day in a limo. On October 24th, the guy showed up at Kristine's, but in a car, not a limousine. That was a little bit disappointing. Should have been a major red flag, but he insisted that there was a mix-up and they'd be fine. They'd be at the hotel with the A-listers in no time. But first, they had some time to kill, so they stopped at a club to have a few drinks. Finally, they left for the Bonaventure Hotel. It's quite a sight to see. Just look at this place. It's been featured in many Hollywood productions, TV shows, movies. True Lies was filmed in their famous elevators that go all the way up to the 35th floor. Kristine was being taken up on one, hoping to rub elbows with the stars. When they walked inside the room, though, it was empty. There was no party and nothing was happening, and Kristine was confused. She's like, what's going on? And then without warning, she figured it out. Because this man lunged towards her, started trying to kiss her and grope her. She, of course, pushes him away and said, this is not what I agreed to. What are you doing? Then he threw her down in the bed and started to rip at her clothing. She fought back. She wouldn't stop. He was holding her down and he yelled, I just wanted you for sex. It's so gross. What a creep. And he keeps going. He's pulling her pantyhose off, and then out of nowhere, he reaches behind the bed frame and he pulls out a rope that was tied to the bed. This was 100% planned. He knew he was going to do this, probably even before he chose Kristine. He tried to grab her hands and tie her up, but she kept resisting. She was kicking and screaming. She was able to get free long enough to race to the bathroom, but he was quick on her heels. And she wasn't fast enough to shut the door. He grabbed her legs and dragged her back to the bed. They continued to fight, and he finally put her in a chokehold, whispering to her that if she stayed calm and stopped fighting and just let him tie her up, he would let her go. Yeah, right. Don't ever believe these monsters. Kristine wasn't falling for it. She struggled to break free. But he was able to grab onto a belt from her dress and rip it off her, and then he tried using it to tie her hands behind her back. Clearly, he was attempting to get her in a very vulnerable position where he could have his way with her, while she just lied there subdued. But she kept kicking and kicking. Finally, the belt flew from his hands, but then he grabbed his own necktie and he ripped it off, and again tried to tie Kristine's hands behind her back. At this point, she thought that he was going to win. She was face down on the bed, but she knew she couldn't give up. She had to give it her all or she might die. So she gathered up all her strength that she had left, and she used it to jump up as fast as she could, and she ran. She made it through the door and into the hotel hallway, where she was desperately pounding on every door until one opened a crack. A man cautiously peered out while she was screaming, "Please let me in. This man is trying to..." You know what? It was obvious from what she looked like. She was disheveled, her clothes were torn. The man let her inside, and she called the police. They were there within minutes. After gathering all the information from Kristine, they were able to track down the man who rented the hotel room. None other than Victor Paleologos. He was arrested and charged with attempted forcible sexual intercourse and battery with the intent to force himself on her, as well as false imprisonment using violence. If you're wondering how he could afford a presidential suite, well, stealing, obviously. He was actually convicted for stealing people's information and taking out credit cards in their name that same year. At trial, Victor pleaded not guilty. He insisted Kristine had willingly come with him into his hotel room and that she consented to being intimate, and she became angry at some point about something. And as she was trying to leave, there was a minor argument, and he tried to claim that he was trying to calm her down. And she had this strappy purse, and then it wound around her wrist. And when he went to grab it, she pulled back. And that's why it appeared that she had rope burns. The jury was not convinced, but because it was he said, she said, ultimately Victor took a plea deal. He said it would cost $30,000 for him to go through another trial, so he pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of false imprisonment. He also had his former employer at a bank that he worked for send a letter to the judge. It talked about Victor's character, that he was a loyal employee, and that charging him with a felony would take away his ability to continue to have his employment. So the letter urged the court to reduce the charge to a misdemeanor, and it was granted. I can't believe it. Here's this guy getting away with this, walking away with only 3 years of probation. That was it. Well, guess what? The letter wasn't even real. Later, it was revealed that Victor forged that letter. In actuality, his boss said he was a terrible employee, and they thought he was stealing from the company because ever since he got fired, the thefts stopped. In 1991, Victor struck again. And these are only the documented times that he tried to lure women with his false pretenses. This time it was a woman, Elizabeth Davis. They met at the airport, and he approached her saying, once again, he's a Disney producer. He invited her to a dinner party. And at this party, there would be a casting for a James Bond movie. So she agreed to meet him at that restaurant later. They were having some cocktails, but when she looked away, he put something into her drink. She noticed it when she turned back around. There was a white substance floating on the top of it. So she excused herself. She pretended to go to the restroom, but she alerted the staff, and they called the police. They took a report, got his information, but no charges were filed against him in that case because he ran from the scene after the police showed up. By 1994, Victor was living in Marina del Rey and still on probation at the time. A girl in his neighborhood caught his eye. They would just greet each other every day here and there, just saying hello, but then it turned into talking, and ultimately Victor asked her on a date. Let's call her Jane. She wanted to remain anonymous. They hit it off and they began a relationship together. But about 6 months in, things just were not working out, and Jane wanted to break it off. But he wasn't going to let that happen. First, it was the begging and the calling nonstop, leaving messages, showing up places, and then the con. Victor told Jane that he was dying of a brain tumor. It was terminal. You don't think people would really make this stuff up, but they do. And he told her he didn't have much time to live and he wanted to spend it with her. He would beg her to please not leave. Don't let him die alone. And Jane had a heart, and she gave in. She would come see him and keep him company, but all the while, Victor was running scams all over town. He was trying to con businesses out of money. He was caught trying to steal almost $100,000 from a company, but he once again convinced the judge to let him plead to a lesser charge. And he did, for making false financial records. So again, he gets off without any jail time or truly being sentenced for the real crimes that this man was committing. And just a few months later, he was arrested again and charged with grand theft auto. This time, he tried to purchase a Saab from a Century City dealership with a bad check that he stole from someone else. You're going to hear the same story again and again. He was let off, once again for a lesser charge of creating false financial records. Why? You tell me. The ace up his sleeve was always plea bargains. He would go through all the legal proceedings. His lawyers were always good. He knew the law and would wait and then swoop in and plead guilty to a lesser charge. In many cases, the court would want to hurry up and get to the next case. So it worked. By January 1996, Victor was still carrying on the dying ruse, now saying his dying wish was to open an Italian restaurant, and he wanted Jane to come view this new location with him. He was going to purchase it and renovate it. It was in Brentwood, and she agreed. When she got inside, it was empty except for a few tables. So they sat down, they started to talk, and then out of nowhere, this man sprung up, and he attacked her. Jane was no match for him. He was able to pick her up and carry her into the bathroom, where he tried to rip away her clothing and force himself on her. She kicked and she screamed really loudly, and he had one hand on her neck, and he was using the other one to grope her. But she didn't give up. She kept fighting, and she was able to break free and run outside just as a handyman was coming into the restaurant. Victor tried to get the guy to leave, but Jane used this as her opportunity to run as fast as she could all the way to her car. But Victor caught up to her. He was crying, he was begging, he was apologizing for what he had done, but Jane wasn't convinced. She sped away thinking that she was hoping that was the last time she would see him. But she was wrong. Just a month later, while she was home alone, Jane heard a noise. She crept towards her bedroom to find Victor on the floor hiding near her bed. He had a long cord in his hands. Since the last attack, she armed herself with pepper spray, which she grabbed on her way to investigate this noise. As soon as he tried to run towards her and tie that cord around her neck, she unloaded the spray right into his face and ran to her neighbors to call 911. They got there within 5 minutes, but Victor had once again already escaped, stealing a handgun and a bunch of Jane's jewelry. She filed a report and wanted to press charges. An investigation was conducted, and Victor was finally tracked down when he stole another vehicle, which was later found at a hotel in Malibu. They were able to locate which room he was in at that hotel. They told him to come out with his hands up, but he threatened to shoot himself. So they had to call in the damn SWAT team to get this man out. But he did end up escaping and running into a mobile home park. He was trying to find one of the doors that was unlocked, and he ran inside one of these homes where these people were freaking out. This man would not quit. The SWAT team found the mobile home that he was hiding in. Once again, he refused to come out. This went on for 3 or 4 hours until they finally were able to apprehend him. And guess what? He denied the whole thing. He said that he never broke in anywhere. He just politely asked the occupants of the mobile home to use their phone. He was going to go turn himself in, apparently. Yeah, right. At this time, he was charged with burglary, grand theft, and again, false imprisonment. The trial didn't take place until 1998. And again, he pulls that ace. His lawyers tell the judge to drop all charges except burglary for what he took from Jane's apartment. His deal was 6 years in prison, but the judge agreed to suspend the prison time in exchange for Victor completing probation for 104 months. Otherwise, he would have to serve, and I'm in shock. And as you probably guessed, he thought he could keep working the system, collecting more victims. It was just a month later, in August of 1998. He had a lot of practice now. He had his ruse down pat. It worked each time, with each new victim. He perfected it even more, accounting for any missteps that he may have taken in the past. He was ready to put it into action once again, this time at the Sky Bar in West Hollywood. His targets were attractive women in their 20s, and he would try to get them to talk and see if they mentioned acting. Then his con, that he was a high-powered producer interested in them for his new role. That night, he saw 2 women, Kimbyrleigha and 24-year-old Heather Mayer. They were leaving the bar and walking down Sunset Boulevard. He walked up to them, paying more attention to Heather, and ran his same lines that he was a producer from Disney, interested in casting for a very specific woman for some promotions that they were doing for the new James Bond movie. It's so weird. It's like Disney to soften them up, childhood memories, James Bond to make them feel sexy, and one of the most beautiful girls in the world. A Bond girl. That's the manipulation. The project sounded pretty straightforward. The man was dressed in a suit, he was well-spoken, he was put together. The way he carried himself, he was very convincing. Then he mentioned the rate, that it would be upward of $100,000 if Heather was interested. He was putting together a little closed audition at the Ritz-Carlton on Sunday morning, but it was very private, hush-hush. She would have to come alone. Well, of course, Heather was excited. She said, yeah, I'm interested. The man told her to meet at 8:30 a.m. wearing a black miniskirt, nude pantyhose, and black high heels. It's the same thing every time. And it's sick to think that this is his fantasy, the sexy secretary fantasy. And Heather kept her promise. She showed up on time wearing the outfit. Victor met her in the hotel lobby with a folder full of papers, and he laid out all the details of the job, including the pay. They looked very legit. Heather agreed to the contract. Victor was excited. He said, great, now all we have to do is have you meet my business partner, and then we get the go-ahead and we start the project. He told Heather that he would drive her to the next location, a restaurant in Brentwood, the very same empty restaurant that he had used before, the one that he pretended he was going to renovate as his dying wish when he lied to poor Jane. Heather didn't get into his car. She agreed to follow him in her own vehicle, very smart. He escorted her into this empty restaurant, and Heather was confused. It was old, it was dark, it had nothing but 3 chairs set out in the middle. Victor explained that there would be a woman, his business partner, coming in shortly, and Heather asked if she could slip away to use the bathroom. She was really scoping the place out, looking for any other way out, any doors. She didn't feel right about this audition. Something just felt off. But maybe it was just not what she was used to. When she came back, Victor said, you know what? We should spend a few minutes going over the poses for the promotional material so that you're ready for my partner. He really wanted her to get the part, so he would guide her, and she agreed. He told her to sit on the floor, cross her legs, and put her ankles very close together. This is something he emphasized. Of course, because he was probably trying to tie them up real fast to keep her from kicking like the other girls had. Heather did as she was told, and just like that, he pulls out some kind of strap with a buckle on it. And as you pull it, it would get tighter and tighter. It's like this one that I'm showing on the screen. It's scary. He quickly slipped it around her ankles and he pulled it tightly. And Heather was caught off guard. She was not okay with this. She yelled for him to take it off. But instead, Victor jumped on top of her, pushed her to the ground. She fell backwards. He told her to keep quiet. Well, Heather was like, F that. She wasn't having it. She started to fight, just like Jane. Then he ripped off his necktie. Classic move on his part each time. Remember, he would provide the necktie? Yeah. To try to tie Heather's hands behind her back. He got one of them in his grip, but she wouldn't let him get the other one. She fought as hard as she could. All of a sudden, a new move. He dropped her hand, threw the tie around her neck, but not before Heather was able to slip her hand underneath. Yes, that is exactly what they tell you to do. Release the pressure. He turned her over and sat on her back with her face into the ground and his hand around her mouth, pulling the necktie. Then he got one of his hands underneath her and pressed her butt against him in an upward position, and then began to rip at her hosiery while whispering, I knew from the first time I saw you, I couldn't control myself. Well, try. These monsters, they take what they want. And poor Heather, she was still putting up a fight. She heard the sound of Victor taking off his belt, and then she heard a zipper. Even more frightened, she kicked her legs again and again until the belt started to give way and she was finally free and able to get up. She made it to the door, but not before Victor grabbed her and put his body weight against it, keeping it closed. He had the audacity to tell her, I know this must be traumatizing to you, but I'm not going to let you leave. The fact that we get to hear the words that came out of this monster's mouth makes it even worse. Heather, thinking quickly, grabbed a hold of her sharp stiletto heel, and she waved it in his face like a dagger. She distracted him with that and slipped from his grip. She was finally outside and running toward her car. Thankfully, she had driven herself. She jumped in and raced away. She had no idea where she was going, and she didn't care. She just wanted to get as far away from this evil man as she could, and she called 911. The police arrested Victor, and in his car was a kink set, so to speak. Lubes, vibes, dills, rope. Yeah. Once again, he posted bail, and he was out of jail. until the trial in July 1999. It literally looked like this guy was going to get away with it again, just like the times before. And most of the charges were dropped, except this time one wasn't. The felony battery on Heather. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison for that charge, on top of 6 more years for violating his probation. Yes, finally. But why then was he out of prison in February 2003 in order to somehow be involved in Kristi's disappearance? Was he? He was. He was paroled on January 20th, 2003. He was only in prison for like 3 years. It makes me feel like women's bodies are not valuable to the justice system unless they're dead. Violations seem to be swept under the rug. And then these men are released again. And again, we all know their crimes escalate. So at first, when investigators were not sure if it was possible for Victor to have come up with such an elaborate scheme by the time he saw Susan Murphy, since he only had a few days since he had gotten out, they thought wrong. He had years to perfect this scam. They didn't have to worry about catching him because he was already in jail after trying to steal a BMW X5 from Beverly Hills BMW. It's the same every time. The Saab, the other car he sold, now a BMW. He thought he was real smooth. Dressed to impress like a corporate executive, Victor appeared interested in purchasing a new car in cash. And in this part of LA, this happens every day. This is a very upscale area. He looked the part, and they fell for it. He gave them a fake social security number, a fake name of Robert Morton, fake bank account information, and he acted calm and collected as they checked everything out. Meanwhile, there was an attendant putting gas in his soon-to-be new car and driving it back, and that is when he intercepted this attendant. Since the attendant knew that he had been working with the other employees, he didn't think twice. He just walked past Victor, letting him know that he was just going to go make sure everything checks out. But by that time, Victor had jumped into the BMW and he was off. The dealership, of course, called the cops, but it wasn't long before Victor was caught, and I have this footage on the dashboard camera. They did a little pat down and they found a wallet with a bunch of stolen licenses, stolen credit cards, IDs, blank checks with other people's name on it. These will come into play later when yet another connection is made in this huge scheme. It was time to bring Susan Murphy in and do a lineup with Victor and 5 other guys to see if she could identify him. I actually listened to her talking about this in a video, and she described it as knowing right away who he was, but that he was trying to make himself look different, like sort of give himself a different stature, kind of lowering himself down, maybe making one arm look like it was longer than the other just to throw her off. But it didn't work. She knew who he was right away. In a separate lineup, Susan's boyfriend, Mark, also picked Victor out right away. They were positive he was the guy who pretended to be a Disney executive to lure Susan into some building on La Cienega Boulevard. That same building was the abandoned restaurant called Cafe Milano. It was an Italian restaurant where Victor used to be an employee. He and another man purchased it together to renovate it. It was a millionaire businessman who was the owner of a property investment company. He was probably scammed by Victor too. So they did a third lineup, but these are paper lineups. They're just pictures. This isn't in person. And this was the valet attendant. So they would show them 6 pictures of men, one of which was Victor. Unfortunately, he was not able to make a correct identification. He had only seen the man in the parking lot for a few seconds. It wasn't long enough for him to study his facial features. But there was a new witness who came forward by Wednesday, February 26th, after the same composite sketch had been put in the media. This is where I told you things would really connect. It was a real estate broker. His name was Paul Cady. He recognized the sketch as a man that he had shown a number of luxury properties to. He told the detectives the man walked into his Santa Monica office off La Cienega at 7:30 p.m. on February 7th. He told him he wanted to buy a home in his price range, which was $500,000 to $750,000. And he wanted to move in fast because he was expanding his company called Logos Corporation, Logos, the last part of Victor's last name. Paul said it was too late for him to start showing him anything that day, but said that he would be glad to do it on Saturday at 11 o'clock. So that day, Paul drove Victor up to Laurel Canyon, and this is a really nice area. It is way up these winding roads in the hills. I get car sick. every time I take this drive. The roads are so narrow. It's almost like one way, but it's actually not. And just look at these homes. They're absolutely gorgeous. Paul showed Victor a really beautiful home on Wonderland Avenue and then another one on Skyline Drive. While they were there, they spotted an open house. It was on the same road. This house was really unique, and Victor took interest in it right away. It was at 8583 Skyline Drive. It had an outside enclosed patio out front that paralleled the street, and it was at a dead-end road on the end of Skyline Drive where the road came to a point where there was a lookout and a view of Los Angeles. It was very pretty. The realtor mentioned that there were also some hiking trails in this area, and he showed Victor that this is where the locals would go hiking. He seemed very interested in this more secluded, dead-end residence. The home was spectacular and had this big back patio, very impressive design, but Victor still wanted to look at some other properties, so they left and they went to a few more homes. This routine continued a few more times. Paul spending the whole day catering to Victor, picking him up and taking him all around. On Tuesday, February 11th, once again, picks him up from the Century Plaza Hotel, takes him to see maybe 6 or 7 more homes. And after leaving one in particular, Paul got word that the owner was missing his credit card and his driver's license, but he would never suspect that his client did it. They again met on Wednesday the 12th, Thursday the 13th, and even the 14th on Valentine's Day. Kristi went missing the next day. Paul also reported that Victor acted really strangely in each one of these homes. After walking into a closet and closing the door, he would scream and then ask the real estate agent if he could hear him. Victor said he was allegedly checking how soundproof the house was for music production and film, but the detectives found this information very chilling. Paul said that February 15th was one of the only days that he didn't meet up with Victor, but that they did meet on Sunday evening to continue looking at homes. Paul finally dropped him off at a store around 8:40 p.m. Then the next day, it was time for Victor and Paul to sit down and draw up an offer for one of the homes. So they met again to go over the contract. When he was going to drop Victor off in the evening around 6 at the hotel, Victor made a remark that he was sick of not having his own vehicle. And he asked him if there was like a Mercedes or a BMW dealership nearby. And Paul said yes, so he dropped him off at Beverly Hills BMW. And we know that's where he stole the SUV and was apprehended. He also stole from all the homes that Paul was showing him. That is how he was able to afford hotels and food and nice clothing. It was a vicious cycle. He even stole from hotel guests. That day, they got a search warrant for Victor's clothing that he was wearing when he was booked into the jail, and they wanted to search every home that Victor toured because the clothing may contain evidence related to the crime, and the suspect may have used one of these locations to commit a crime against Kristine Johnson. Detective Obenchain also said that she believed, based on the above stated facts, that Victor was involved in the abduction and or murder of Kristine Johnson. They also got a warrant for the restaurant on La Cienega Boulevard. Apparently, this is where Victor was living. They collected every piece of evidence they could find. Investigators found stolen ID cards, keys. In addition, they obtained Victor's computer, and they analyzed the hard drive. And that's when they discovered disturbing images. Women depicted in white-collared shirts, black skirts, nylons, and stilettos. Exactly what the casting agent said to wear to these James Bond auditions. While her family prayed for her safe return, 12 days had passed without significant results. To honor Kristine, her loved ones held 2 vigils, one in her hometown and the other in the capital city, to celebrate her 22nd birthday. People from all over joined in to show their support and to bring attention to the search for Kristine. It was such a heartbreaking moment. So much was going on behind the scenes, and everyone was hoping to find Kristi. Maybe she was being held somewhere, and they think Victor is the only person that can tell them where she is and what happened to her. Detective Obenchain had another detective go speak with Victor because maybe a man would be able to get through to him better than a woman, since Victor clearly had no respect for them. Detective Henry went out to the jail to talk to Victor, and right away he tells him, listen, I'm not here on your current charges. About the BMW? No. I'm hoping you can help me with something else. I'm with the missing persons unit, and I need help finding this girl. And he put a photo of Kristi right in front of Victor. Before even giving this photo a glance, Victor's like, no. He goes on to say, I've seen all the reports on the news. I don't know her, and I haven't seen her. Detective John Henry lies. He says, a witness said they saw you with Kristi. He kind of wants Victor to think that maybe they're just trying to get information and they're not suspecting he had anything to do with it. So he's like, come on, maybe you saw her in passing. It's a big city, lots of people. Just let me know. Just take one more look at the picture and tell me if you've ever run into her anywhere. I just really need your help. But it doesn't work. Right then, Victor asked for an attorney. He refused to speak with Detective Henry, but that didn't stop Henry from talking to him. He pleaded with him, saying, come on, you're not in trouble. We just need to speak with anyone who could have seen her because she could be in danger. Victor told him he was a parolee and won't risk anything because he didn't trust the cops, and they were most likely trying to set him up for something he didn't do. Detective Henry tried to go the sympathetic route. He was like, imagine it's your mom or your sister. Wouldn't you want to help? Wouldn't you want someone to talk if they had seen something? But this is not working on him either because all he cares about is himself. And that was obvious. They were able to find out some information about him in his past. He was born in 1962 in Pennsylvania. He seemed to have a normal, loving family and upbringing, the youngest of 5 brothers. He went to college, got a bachelor's degree in New Mexico, and then headed out to LA for his MBA. They actually found no record of his graduate studies. This is just what he said. He was married in 1990 until 1993. That was the same time he met Elizabeth Davis and tried to poison her in 1991. Interesting that he's able to hold down some relationships, though. He failed at the restaurant business, and we know the rest. He had the woe is me type of personality, like the world was against him. But he did end up providing them with an alibi. He explained that he spent the evening at home before heading out to IHOP to meet a friend. When his friend was able to back up the story, the police were worried that they'd come to another dead end. Yet they knew Victor still had enough time to meet up with Kristine after he ate with his friend at IHOP. An in-person lineup had been scheduled for Monday, March 3rd. Terry was making her rounds on all the networks, trying to keep Kristi's face in the media. And meanwhile, search efforts had been halted because there were downpours happening. A violent storm had come through, one that LA doesn't usually see. Southern California is known for its lack of rainfall, but these forceful downpours were bringing a bunch of mud down the slopes surrounding Hollywood. It made it very hard for people to get out there and search safely, and they didn't even know where to put their efforts until another person came forward with vital information. Another concerned citizen from the Laurel Canyon area named Douglas Kirkland, he called the police to say he recognized Kristine from the pictures in the news. He told the detectives that Kristine was lost in Hollywood Hills on February 15th and that she flagged him down in front of his residence. She asked for directions to what she was referring to as the Castle House. At first, the man said he had no idea what Kristine was talking about, but his wife was outside and she overheard the conversation. She's like, I know where there's a castle-like house. She pointed Kristine towards the home around 5:30 p.m. Wow. We know she called 411 around the same time. And then another witness calls in. Her name, Kathy DeBono. She's a Hollywood actress. She was best known for her role on Star Trek Deep Space Nine. She said that she saw the composite sketch and it looked like a man that approached her at Century City Mall in about 1998 or 1999. She told investigators his name was Brian Cathay, an executive at Disney. He complimented her on her legs and told her she would be the perfect model for their James Bond poster. Yes, I'm sick of hearing it too. How many women did he do this to? Kathy offered to give him her agent's phone number, but Victor told her that he would rather not have to deal with an agent. That way, she could keep more of the money if she got the role on her own. Kathy said he wanted her to leave the mall right then and there, but she knew better than that. She asked him for a business card, and he handed her this old, beat-up card, but he wouldn't let her keep it because he said it was his last one. Instead, she just wrote down all the information, and she gave that to her agent. The man told Kathy to wear a white button-down shirt, black skirt, nylon stockings, and stilettos. Her agent contacted Disney and verified that the man was a fake. The person who answered the phone was Brian from Disney, but he quickly let the agent know he was not the man from the mall. Brian urged the agent to inform their client not to attend the audition. He was empathetic, and he reiterated that he was not in the mall and had not given Kathy a business card. Further, he said someone may have his business card and was passing it off as their own. But Kathy still drove to Laurel Canyon to meet this guy. But she brought a stuntman from deep space. The guy told her to wait in her car, and she did as she was instructed, but he never arrived. It sucks because all of this is circumstantial. They still don't know where Kristi is. So Monday came before they knew it, and Victor was going to be put in a lineup with other men, and witnesses were going to try to pick him out. Interestingly, Victor had grown out his beard since he had been arrested, and the detectives knew that this could be a way to throw off their witnesses. So they asked the jail to have Victor shave, but he wouldn't. So they actually had to get a court order to shave this man's face because he would not shave his beard on his own. Susan, Mark, and the valet attendant were all asked separately which man they believed was the person that they knew as a suspect. And just like before, Susan and Mark picked Victor, but the valet attendant couldn't choose the correct individual. He explained he didn't get a good look at him. It was 3 p.m. once it was finished, and Obenchain's phone rang. Right away, she knew it wasn't good. A few hours earlier, 4 teenage boys were smoking cigarettes and hanging out walking down Skyline Drive high up in the hills. They walked all the way to the end where the pavement stops, and they were looking over all of Los Angeles, just taking in the view. One of the boys walked closer to the edge and looked down. The drop was a few hundred feet, but about 80 feet down, something looked off. Among all the green, he saw something blue. He told his friends it looked weird, and they all started to peer over into this narrow ravine full of mud and thick brush, and they thought they could make out the shape of a body. It looked like a mannequin. One of the boys started to make his way down there little by little to get a closer look, but it didn't take him long to turn back and yell that it looked like a dead body. They didn't know what to do. They didn't have cell phones, so they walked down Skyline Drive, and they saw a man outside gardening, but he said he didn't have a phone with him. They walked back to the edge of the ravine, pacing, trying to think of what to do. A woman, let's call her Sally, who lived in the area about a mile away off Mariscal Drive, was walking her 3 dogs like she did every day. She crossed this road right here on Wonderland Park Avenue, went down Skyline Drive, past the Castle House, which is right here, and went up to the 8500 block where the lookout was. That's when she saw the boys huddled near the edge of the ravine. As she got closer, one of the boys said they thought that there was a body down below. Sally jumped into action. She tied her dogs up and she made her way down that ravine, carefully balancing herself as she tried to get a closer look. There it was, a body, lying on its right side. The legs were covered with a blue fabric, the head facing down the slope. On top of the head was a gray hoodie, covering the neck and the shoulders. Sally could see their hands were tied behind their back, and there was a scrunchie on their right wrist. The body was folded into sort of a fetal position. The person was not clothed from the waist down except ripped pantyhose, and the buttocks area was exposed. They appeared to be wearing a gray shirt that was pulled up in the back, exposing the midsection. Some hair was sticking out from the hoodie, and she could tell it was dirty blonde. Sally didn't know what to think. It was a lot to take in. She didn't see any blood or wounds at all, but she knew this is most likely the body of a deceased female. Sally took note that the body probably would have gone unnoticed had it not hit a tree stump on the way down, trapping it in a more visible position. Sally quickly left. She called the police and she waited until the LAPD arrived on scene. In these moments, as she waited, she realized that this could be the missing girl that she had seen on TV, and she couldn't hold in that sadness. Witnessing something like this is not easy. She cried and cried, and she let the cops take over the scene and then made her way back home in shock, especially since this was so close to where she lived. But was this Kristine Johnson? Detectives think it is, especially because the realtor, Paul Cady, had brought Victor right to this house off the 8500 block of Skyline Drive, the one that he seemed so intrigued by, 8583 Skyline Drive at the dead end, right before the lookout, right near a ravine. As Detective John Henry made his way down there, he was hoping it wasn't Kristi, but there was too much adding up. He made his way down and he saw the blue sleeping bag, and just below it, there was a pair of feet sticking out, and they had black stiletto heels on them. And that's when he felt his stomach drop. He knew it was Kristi. The shirt was white, but it had become dirty with the rains and the mud. He could tell that her hands and ankles were tied with white shoelaces, and on her exposed midsection, a lower back tattoo of a hibiscus flower. They found her, but the identification was not official. They had the difficult task of retrieving her body from this very dangerous location while also preserving as much evidence as possible. It was going to take a lot of work. It took hours and a team of experienced rescue workers, and they carefully put her inside a body bag to preserve any clothing that she had on, and they slowly lowered a basket down. They put the body inside, and they labeled her Jane Doe 22 until she could be formally identified. Unbelievable. She was hoisted up over the ridge and put on a gurney to be transported to the medical examiner's office. Now they had to notify Kristi's parents. And at this moment, her mom, Terry, she was on a flight to New York. So they called her father, Kirk. As soon as he answered, the chief of police asked him if he was home and if anyone was there with him. And he said, "Yes, I'm here with my wife." And as soon as he heard that question, he knew that he was probably going to get bad news. The chief continued by saying, "I'm very sorry. We found Kristi, but she's no longer with us." Kirk's life flashed before him. All the memories of his daughter being born, her childhood, it was all shattered. It was too much to take in. He ran outside and he looked into the sky and he cried, "Kristine." And then he just said, "I love you, I love you, I love you." And at that point, he knew that she was in heaven. And that poor father, Terry got the news soon after she landed. She was equally upset and torn apart, and she knew she had to turn right back around and come back to California. It just did not seem real. Before the autopsy was conducted, the body was taken to the Forensic Science Center, and this is where they collected all the evidence. It's where they take off all the clothes and accessories, and they bag them for analysis. It was in the middle of the night into March 4th. Now Oban Chain was there watching the entire procedure, taking notes of everything she observed. Here are a few things that they found. Her shoes were scuffed in a way that showed that she was dragged at one point, and they grazed across the road. She had blisters on her feet from the shoes being a bit too small and narrow on her feet. Her hands and ankles were tied with white Converse sneaker shoelaces. When they removed the gray sweatshirt from on top of her head, it was unbelievable. Unbelievable. Her face, it didn't even resemble a face. It was just all black, dead tissue, unlike the rest of her body. Sadly, insects had gotten to that portion, and it was just unbelievably devastating to see that. When Oban Chain saw that she still had pantyhose on, though, she thought that maybe this meant that someone didn't force themselves on her because they would have to take the time to put those pantyhose back on. However, they did collect DNA evidence that may still be on or in her body. The autopsy was conducted on March 5th by Dr. Lisa Sheinin. Oban Chain and another detective were present. They were at the LA coroner's office, and here's what the doctor observed. The victim's face and head had been severely decomposed, which was due to a number of factors. One, the position of the body, because the head was laying straight down and blood pooled to that area, and then because of the elements. There were wounds that aren't apparent without medical knowledge. Some were post-mortem, meaning after death, but there was one that was determined to be peri-mortem, and that happens on the brink of death, as they lay dying. She had bruising on the outer part of her pelvis and her hips, and there was evidence of recent sexual activity. The sample still had to be analyzed for DNA, though. There were marks on both of her wrists from the shoelaces, and there was a very large bruise on the upper left part of her arm near the elbow. This indicated that someone had forcefully grabbed her here. She had bruises on her right and her left calf, as well as both knees and in her buttocks area on the left. It was evident that she put up a violent fight for her life. Her left ear was no longer attached to her scalp. But the most significant finding was the peri-mortem injury. It was to her skull behind her left ear. There was bruising to the front portion of her throat, but the bones in her neck were not broken, which is what they usually see in strangulation cases. The manner of death was ruled a homicide, but the cause was still unknown. There were other tests they needed to carry out, such as toxicology tests and an examination of all of her organs. Her final official identification was done by matching her teeth to dental records. This poor woman. I can't imagine the horror that she had to endure. And they still needed to connect Victor to this murder. They still did not have any evidence directly linking him to this crime. However, as they went through his phone records, they noticed several calls made to a number around 11:30 p.m. on the night that Kristi was killed. They tracked down this person. Let's call him Joey. He was 32, he was married, he worked at a pharmacy off Santa Monica Boulevard in La Cienega. Detectives paid him a visit. Joey was actually Victor's alibi. He had been contacted by phone briefly when Detective Henry was interviewing Victor in jail, and Joey was the one to confirm that he was with Victor at IHOP that night. But now detectives want to know everything he knows about his friend Victor. And Joey looks scared. He told detectives he doesn't know him well at all. They met on January 24th of that year, and Joey was just a handyman. He worked for some buildings in the area, including the abandoned restaurant. He was there to tidy it up. And that is where he met Victor. The landlord was his old business partner's son, and he really wanted him to leave, but there was a history there. They were trying to be nice, give him a place to stay until he got back on his feet. Later, it was found out that Victor actually lied to them about why he was in prison. They thought it had to do with some bad financial decisions, not sex crimes. Anyway, Victor was nice to Joey, and they talked and they exchanged numbers just in case they needed anything. And that time came on Saturday, February 15th. At some point, they make plans to meet at IHOP at 11:30 p.m. They had gone there together before. Joey said he got there and he waited for Victor to arrive, but he wasn't there yet. And that Victor called him 3 times to tell him he was running behind. The first time he said he was with someone and driving there and he'd be there soon. Then he called him again around 11:30 and then at midnight to update Joey on his arrival, saying, "Okay, I'm making my way over." When he called that third time, right before midnight, he said he was walking up. Joey noticed that he came from a different direction than he usually did. It wasn't the direction of where he knew Victor was living. And he wasn't in a car being dropped off like he said he would be. At the time, he didn't think much of it, but now he's telling the detectives everything that stood out to him. They ordered some food, and while they waited, Joey noticed that there were 3 red scratches, like welts, above Victor's right eyebrow. He asked him what happened. He said, "Oh, just some furniture fell on top of me, no big deal." They were there until after 1 a.m, and that is when Victor asked a question that was kind of out of character. He wanted to know if he could spend the night at Joey's. They weren't far from Victor's place, but it wasn't that comfortable. So Joey was like, I don't want to be rude. And they took the city bus to Joey's off Sunset and Gower Street. They boarded the bus, and Joey said it was weird because he sat in the front, but Victor went all the way to the back, which he thought was a bit odd because it wasn't full. Joey showed him to the living room couch where he could sleep that night. And Victor said, "Please wake me up at like 4:30 in the morning because I want to catch the early morning mass at Good Shepherd Church in Beverly Hills." Joey said they had some coffee together real early, around 4 or 4:30. And then Victor left by 5 or 5:30. He just walked out the front door. Detectives went to that church. Not only was there no 6:30 a.m. mass on the weekends, but when they showed a picture of Victor to everybody that worked there and all the members, he wasn't one of them. After all this, Obenchain had a theory of what she believed happened to Kristi, and you can tell me your thoughts. I want to know. She believes Kristi bumped into Victor at Century City Mall. He approached her just like he'd done with all the other women who came forward. He complimented her, carried himself professionally, said the right things, and offered her a last-minute audition, and told her to meet him that evening at 5:30 at the house off Skyline Drive that looked like a castle. It's an easier landmark to find than perhaps the house on Skyline Drive, who knows? But he gave her directions and told her exactly what she needed to wear: a white blouse, black miniskirt, black heels, and sheer pantyhose. Poor Kristi wanted so badly for this to be her big break. She may have been a bit apprehensive, but on the other hand, she was in Century City, which is the area where all the producers and agencies are based. So it made sense. She was in a logical location to be discovered. Kristi walked away feeling like this could be her chance to become the next Bond girl. And with her mother's permission, she bought whatever she wanted at the mall. She spared no expense. This footage shows her in Bloomingdale's purchasing the pantyhose and the $185 blouse. She probably figured that if she landed this role, she would have more than enough money to make up for this purchase. She wanted to look her best, to stand out and make an impression. She knew she may only get one shot. So she rushed and she gathered all of those items that she needed. Her last stop, trashy lingerie, because the shoes at the mall, well, they were probably pretty expensive. So to get some stilettos at a lingerie store seemed like it would be a better price. Then she rushed home, bumping into Lucas out front, telling him she's excited and in a hurry, and then telling Carrie all about her encounter, including modeling the outfit she was supposed to wear. Her roommate had never seen Kristi so excited about anything. Most likely it was the promise of a $100,000 paycheck that contributed to that. Then she packed up her outfits, got into her car, and headed out for the Hollywood Hills, a glamorous area filled with stars and big-time producers. This is the point where Kristi's hopes and dreams seemed like they were going to come true. All that was left to do was find the castle house that had been described to her. Well, I'm going to tell you that this area is very hard to navigate. The roads, they loop all around. They're steep and narrow. The signs are hidden, sometimes by overgrown trees and brush. Even for someone like me who has been here before, I could easily get lost. If I didn't have GPS, forget about it. There's no way I would make it to some random house. I found the castle house. It's located at 2502 Green Valley Drive. And Jon and I made our way to it. It's a sight to see. Built in 1954, the last time it was sold was in 1972 for only $50,000. Now it's appraised at $2.5 million. Obenchain believes that Victor was waiting outside of this house for Kristi. When she pulled up, he most likely asked to get in her car and then directed her to drive up Skyline Drive to this dead end, which is now where this house sits, on the 8500 block of Skyline Drive, high above the hills on the edge of a ravine. Obenchain thinks that maybe he had watched the real estate agent type in the number to open this outside gate right here. And maybe the door to the inside of the home was unlocked because the house was empty. It was being shown to prospective buyers. Maybe he guided her onto that patio and had the audition there. We don't know. But at some point she changed into that outfit and probably did what he had done to many women who came before her, made her pose, and ended up using shoelaces that he probably prepared beforehand to tie her hands and ankles together. But she fought. One theory that Obenchain had was that this happened inside of her car. I don't know. What do you think? I think it most likely happened inside the house or out on the patio. Either way, her car was involved because that's where the blue sleeping bag came from. I just think that her screams would have echoed too much outside or in a car, but I could be wrong. Either way, she is fighting back, and that's when he goes to an even further extreme than he had in the past. He puts his hands around her neck, and she passes out. He thinks that he's killed her, so he puts her in a sleeping bag. It belonged to her older brother, and he threw her off the edge of the ravine, mere feet from the home that he had been shown on the dead end of Skyline Drive. She was most likely alive when this happened, and it was the skull fracture that caused her to be unable to move, later passing away from her injuries from the impact that she sustained when she hit the tree on her way down. Who knows how long she was with him before this attack, how long he waited before he threw her body over that cliff. It most likely happened when it got dark. We know from previous stories that he sometimes had these women for hours practicing the poses. If they started at 6, they could have gone till 9. It would have been dark. Then he got into Kristi's car and he drove away. The time between this and 11 when he calls his friend Joey is unclear, but Obenchain thinks that he drove Kristi's car to IHOP and he parked it in a back lot where Joey wouldn't be able to see it. Then he got out and walked out front to meet him, and that's why he came from a different direction than usual. He left Kristi's car there, takes the bus with Joey, wakes up really early, catches the bus not to church but back to IHOP, gets Kristi's car, and then parks it in the hotel parking lot in the valet. The valet attendant said that that car came in at 5:45 a.m., and from there he probably just took the bus back to where he was living. It sounds plausible. March 7th, yet another woman came forward, Alice Walker. And I know, it's like a broken record, but I feel like I can't leave this out. She told detectives that she met a man. His name was Victor, last name Ippolito. She was waitressing at Houston's in the very same mall, the same day that he met up with Susan, Century City Mall. He was dressed in a blue business suit with a tie, and they just had some friendly talk. He said he just moved from New York to California. He was staying at the Century Plaza Hotel, and Alice had just moved from Illinois. She was an English major, but she wanted to take her shot at acting. He told her that he was actually publishing a book, and that piqued her interest. She found him attractive, and they were flirting with each other a little bit. She was enjoying the interaction. So he asked her if she would like to hang out after she got off at 11, and she said sure. He told her to meet her in the lobby of the Century Plaza. She actually showed up, only a few blocks away, like I showed you. They sat down and they talked for 4 hours. I can't even believe that, but they were really hitting it off. They were chatting about their future plans, about projects that he was working on, and the business he was trying to start, Kimbyrleigha Corporation. But first, he was working on that book I told you about, a book about a guy named Vincent. Now listen to this. He said it's about a guy who gets a divorce, and then he wants to start a restaurant. So he borrows a bunch of money, but he can't pay it back, so he hires a lawyer. And then he goes to a party with that lawyer, and his lawyer meets some girl, and he tries to have sex with her in his car, but he ends up strangling her to death. And then the lawyer tries to pin it on this man, Vincent. Wow. Now you know why one of Oban Chain's theories is that Kristi was killed in her car. But of course, this conversation would have been foreshadowing because it happened prior to Victor meeting Kristi. But what about the James Bond audition? Well, he didn't exactly offer that to Alice. He said that his friend was the director, and they were looking for a girl, but she had this certain look. She had to have really strong legs. He wasn't sure Alice fit that description, but she told him, well, I was a ballerina for years. So he actually grabbed a hold of her calves to see if they were strong. He told her that the Bond girl character in this film was going to be a dominatrix and that there were going to be all of these shots basically focusing on her legs. Alice believed him. She really thought he was legit. She bought all of the items that he requested, specifically nylons that sparkled like diamonds. Those were his words. She went home, got a couple hours of sleep, bought the items, and then met him at that same abandoned restaurant on La Cienega Boulevard around 2 p.m. on Sunday, January 26th. And he did the same routine as before, made her do a bunch of poses. He put the necktie around her neck, but he didn't tighten it up or anything. Hours went by. And she's like, I gotta go to work. Is this audition gonna happen today? He's like, let me check. She changed back into her regular clothes. And when she came out, he's like, listen, I'm really sorry, but we're gonna have to cancel the audition. Sean Connery is sick. I'll call you and we can reschedule for later in the week. Unbelievably, just 3 days later on Wednesday, he called and she met him again at 5 p.m., same routine. But this time he tried kissing her. His excuse was that it was just part of the rehearsal, but she got angry. And this caused a little tiff between them. But he apologized and he said he's so sorry. He just really wants her to get this part. She met him 2 or 3 more times for dinner, but said it wasn't romantic. They just hung out and they talked. She connected him with this case because of the corporation name, Logos. When she questioned him about the meaning of it, he lied and told her that it was his last name, Ippolitologos. And that was just too similar to Victor Paleologos. And the story, too. That's why she came forward. After this, Alice and Victor talked a few more times on the phone, and he told her he was in the middle of buying a house in Hollywood Hills for $2.5 million and she should come see it, but she declined. When there was no more talk about the audition, Alice pretty much had no more interest in talking to him. He did try calling her on February 15th. He left a voicemail. The number was traced back to a payphone in the Century City Mall. She too picked Victor out of a lineup of photos without hesitation. I know this story has been long. Some people comment that I like to milk it. I'm giving you the facts, and there's so many of them. It takes me a long time. I try not to leave anything out. I think of these individuals that I talk about like they're my own family members. Would I want to leave this part out? No. So I include it. And this wasn't the last woman to come forward. There were others. There was a woman named Laura Hayden that came forward and told them that she met him at Lookout Mountain in Hollywood Hills near a home with a for sale sign back in 2000. Same story again and again for about 8 women from 1991 to 2003. But they were still waiting on that DNA analysis. So far, there was no foreign DNA found under Kristi's fingernails. And all the evidence tested from the Castle House and the other homes that Victor visited, plus the abandoned restaurant, nothing matched anything of Kristi's. By the end of April, toxicology came back negative. Her death was ruled a homicide caused by blunt force trauma to the head and neck. The compression of the neck resulted in internal bleeding and asphyxia. By May 12th, District Attorney Eleanor Hunt filed charges against Victor for first-degree murder. He was eligible for the death penalty. By February 2004, Victor had a defense attorney, and he insisted to the media that his client was innocent, that there was no DNA linking him to this crime. However, there were phone records. At 1:09 p.m. on February 15th, a call went out from Victor's cell phone, and it was traced to a tower that covered the Century City Mall, putting him at the same location that Kristi was at. And when they traced the 3 calls Victor made to Joey that night, guess where they were pinging? Off towers that serviced the Laurel Canyon area and Hollywood Hills. But it still didn't prove that he killed Kristi. And that was the hardest part. And there were no phone calls between Kristi and Victor at all. No security footage from the places that she went in the mall with Victor anywhere near her. And since Victor didn't have a car, they were having a hard time figuring out how he would have gotten up to the Castle House to begin with. No taxis were working that route, and certainly no buses. The defense was also planning to challenge the time of death by using insects found on Kristi's body. The prosecution had to come up with a way to present their most powerful evidence: the women who claimed that they'd been conned by Victor. They created a big board, and it had columns on it. On the far left were pictures of each woman, and then each of the columns had the places where Victor approached them, whether they pitched the James Bond film, the clothing that he asked them to wear, and what each of these women went through, so the jury was able to see this visual and see a pattern. Each one of these women would testify. These visual aids were really important to keep all of the facts in order. The hurdle was getting the prior acts admitted in court. Someone actually left a comment on one of my last videos asking about this specific thing. They were frustrated about why sometimes prior criminal acts aren't allowed in court. And I am not going to go into a full explanation right now, but what I will say is that usually a criminal's prior acts are not admissible because it would prejudice the jury. It would make them look at the defendant as a bad person, and then they would be less likely to be impartial. But there are exceptions to this rule. And in this case, of course, both sides wanted it their way. The prosecution wanted it in, the defense didn't. But ultimately, the similarities in the previous acts is where the exception was given because there were so many similarities. It wasn't like a case where the defendant is on trial for murder and the perpetrator broke in before the murder and the defendant had a history of breaking and entering. Yes, it's similar, but not enough. There are a lot of rules and exceptions. Luckily, the prior acts in this case were admissible by Judge Perry. And there were a few women that came forward and their stories were different. They happened at different malls, and those were excluded. The defense even wanted to keep Kristi's roommate from testifying. Obviously, they were trying to get a bunch of things excluded. However, like I said, there were exceptions, and the defense was arguing this is hearsay. When a person hears someone say something and then they're relaying it. However, the prosecution argued this is actually an exception to the rule because it shows Kristi's plan, her immediate plan to go to this audition, and she was supposed to become this Bond girl with a specific outfit. So it was allowed in. In the case of the insects, the defense really wanted to rely on the age of the maggots, and the prosecution, of course, was worried about them using up all the samples and them not being able to test them on their own. So this is just what keeps these trials from actually happening because all of these things beforehand. The judge decided to have both sides meet with an expert, and the expert was going to run the test in front of them. They were going to watch, and it ended up that there was nothing that useful that came out of it, so they didn't use it. All this trial prep took years. 43-year-old Victor Kimbyrleigha finally went to trial in July of 2006. Kristi's family was in attendance. The jury was comprised of 10 men and 2 women. The prosecutor's opening statement included things about who Kristi was, how she ended up at the mall, how she met Victor, and sadly, how he killed her. He went into very graphic detail, showcasing pictures of the way Kristi's body was found. And of course, Victor wouldn't look. Kristi's parents were in tears. And he went on to tell them that they would hear from women who encountered Victor just like Kristi, and that there was no phone activity on Victor's phone from 3:49 p.m. that day until 10:06 p.m. When it did start back up, his phone pinged in Hollywood Hills. And a search of his computer with all the pictures of women in the exact outfit that he had requested time and time again. Some were bound to chairs. Others, explicit photos of women undressing, wearing one of the said items. This was part of his fantasy. The prosecutor made sure to address the lack of evidence of DNA, but it had more to do with the elements, the downpours, the decomposition, and not proof that it wasn't there at some point. There just wasn't enough to test. But then it was the defense's turn to provide an opening argument. It was short, basically saying there is no evidence that Victor is connected to Kristi. He's never been accused of murdering anyone before, and he didn't kill her. Their trick up their sleeve was they wanted to emphasize how the valet attendant couldn't identify Victor. He was the only outside witness to have seen this man, and he couldn't conclude it was Victor. This insinuated that all these women just wanted to testify to get their 5 minutes of fame. He wanted to make it out like they can't be trusted, that they're actors after all. But this man, he worked for 30 years in valet. He's telling you the truth. He can't say it's Victor. He actually described the man as a Rambo-type character. Does Victor look like Rambo? The defense's argument was you've got the wrong guy, arguing against the prosecution, saying DNA doesn't just not exist, but there's nothing. No semen, no saliva, no hairs, no skin, nothing, and that there was no evidence found in the Skyline house or any other house Victor visited. He did steal things, and that's why he told the agent to go in the other room while he screamed. He just wanted some space to steal. Good arguments, I have to say, but would they be enough? The last point that he argued was that the body was moved. And it was moved while Victor was in jail on the BMW theft. Because had her body been there this whole time, days and days, people in the area would have gone down there and they would have seen it. He fails to take into account how bad the weather was. Normally, yes, people would be hiking, but for the past few days they weren't. It had been raining. Perhaps she was more covered up before the wind and the rains came pouring down, and over time she became more visible. Remember how the death penalty was on the table? Well, the state had 7 women testify. Each story was powerful, emotional, and unique, sharing many similarities, though, to Kristine's. And Kristine's family sat in the back of the courtroom, and they were encouraging each woman. When they saw they were struggling to deliver their testimonies, they would give them a thumbs up, empowering them to keep going. It was becoming increasingly clear that the defense was not getting anywhere. So guess what Victor decides to do? He opted for a plea deal in the middle of the proceedings. Remember, this was Victor's ace in every trial. Wait till the last minute, and then a Hail Mary. In order to get the death penalty removed, Victor decides to plead guilty, hopefully to a lesser charge, and maybe get 10 to 12 years in prison and cut his losses like he had done every other time. The prosecution knew they had weaknesses, so they did want to try to come up with a deal. This was 3 weeks into trial, but they wouldn't budge. It had to be guilty on first-degree murder, not a lesser charge, and he had to give up his right to an appeal. Well, the day came, the defense attorney told the judge his client was going to plead guilty, but he didn't want to make an open confession in court. Instead, he wanted to give a factual confession, not give details, just that he was responsible for her murder, and he would get 25 years to life. No right to an appeal. So finally, in open court, with everyone present, the judge asked Victor if this was his decision to accept a plea deal, and Victor said, "Yes, Your Honor." The judge asked him if he had been forced or if he made it freely, and Victor said it was his choice. The judge asked him, "Are you taking responsibility for her murder today?" Victor said, "Yes, Your Honor, I am." And then Victor's attorney said that Victor would like to make a statement. And he did. He said, quote, "First and foremost, I've always felt from the very beginning, I know what it's like to lose somebody very close to you, and my sympathies have always gone out to the family. I just wanted to make that perfectly clear, that I'm not doing this plea to upset anyone, including the family. My sympathies are with you. Second of all, I would like to acknowledge the fact that there was a tremendous amount of media attention to this issue. I don't want to get into specifics of why I have made this choice specifically, but I think there are some obvious reasons, and I would like to accept the responsibility." After this, the judge said that he needed an actual plea from Victor. So the judge went on to say, "On or about February 15, 2003, you did commit the murder of Kristine Johnson, and that this murder is first degree. To that charge, how do you plead?" And Victor said, "Guilty, Your Honor." When Kristi's father found out that Victor was able to get this plea deal, he was relieved. It wasn't a perfect outcome, but he knew that Victor would be behind bars for good. And that was enough to give Kristine's father some peace of mind. Well, that was about to be put into question because at sentencing, the judge begins with the news that he received an 11-page handwritten motion from Victor from his jail cell. It was a motion to withdraw his plea. Yes, he did. I found this letter. I'm not going to read it, of course, but nice try, good effort. You know, even though it was riddled with silly made-up words trying to sound professional and intelligent, arguing that he was denied sufficient representation, forced into taking the plea. Well, the judge wasn't having it. He said nope. He dismissed the motion because you can't just withdraw your guilty plea because you changed your mind. Instead, Judge Perry went on to sentence him to 25 years to life. On reflection, we can be thankful that the other women who had the misfortune of meeting Victor didn't suffer the same fate. However, at the same time, one life was taken, and that is one too many. Kristine is gone, and all her loved ones have are the memories. Every year, Kirk Johnson makes a call to the California Department of Justice to confirm that Victor remains behind bars. He's been making this call for years to ensure that he is still locked away and unable to commit any more crimes. He takes comfort in knowing that his daughter's killer is where he belongs and the streets are safer. It may not be that much, but this simple phone call is one way that Kirk can help improve the world. This was a long story. It was an intense one. It brings up a lot of questions. Like always, please leave comments. I like to have discussions with all of you, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.